If you want to pump your body and expand your mind, there's only one place to go. Mind Pump. Mind Pump with your hosts, Sal DiStefano, Adam Schaefer, and Justin Andrews.
Did you guys enjoy that with Stan coming by? What a great guy, huh?
Stan's he's a great guy.
Stand-up dude.
Very cool guy, very, very smart. He's a smart dude, and one of the better business people in the muscle building world. We had a great conversation with a great podcast. I think it went for 2 hours.
Another like smart meathead looking guy. It's great to hang out with guys that are also like big guys that are just like, giving us a better name.
I think we found almost all of them.
Yeah, I think we found all of them. He was like the last one. All the unicorns have combined here now.
No, we hit it off with the guy right out the gates and had a great podcast with him. We talked about his past, his training, how he coaches people, his philosophies towards nutrition. He talked a little bit about the vertical diet, which is a kind of his nutrition protocol.
We've had a lot of people asking about this.
Tons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was part of the motivation because we had been in communication back and forth a while ago, and we had been getting hit up so much on like people wanting us to address this diet, and I'll just be honest, been too lazy to dive into it to talk about it and stuff. And so fuck it, we'll just bring him on the show.
I'm not gonna lie, I was dismissive before I ever looked into it. I kind of judged it at first, and not because of Stan. I like Stan; he's a smart dude. But because there's so many diets.
Well, just the name diet, exactly.
Immediately turns me off. But in this episode, you'll hear Stan talk about his philosophies towards nutrition. And here you have right now how much does he weigh now? 250 pounds. He's a big dude, 50-year-old guy. Used to weigh 270,
he lifts
280
mountains.
Pounds. Super strong guy. You hear this guy talk about gut health, the microbiome, micronutrients, and a lot of the stuff that we talk about on the show. So it's really refreshing to hear someone like him talk about those things in the context of building maximum muscle and strength.
Well, it's kind of like what you always say. It's just at one point we all kind of end up in the same place.
It's true.
Yep.
It's true.
There's some people out there in the space right now, and some really intelligent people that are denying some of this stuff because maybe we don't have quite enough evidence to be 100% certain that this is a cause of this or this reacts this way. But those of us that have been doing this for long enough, and you've coached and trained enough people, you've seen enough case studies and examples of that just through your own experience with clients. And, we all kind of end up in the same place. Like, oh shit, what do you know? When I eat these processed garbage foods and stuff like that, sure, I can get in shape and sure I look okay. And, I can manage that when I'm in my 20s, but do 10,
catch up with me.
20, 30 years of that. And, and he kind of shares that his story too, because he doesn't admit being this guy who's was presenting this information his entire career. I mean, he kind of found that out through a lot of trial and error, doing things the wrong way, and like ourselves.
He coaches some of the, doesn't he? He helps the nutrition with the, what's his name? With the big
Thor Bjorgensen?
Yes, some of the top CrossFit athletes, and has helped improve their performance tremendously. He also has, so with this vertical diet, he's come out now with vertical diet meals. And we must get probably on a weekly basis a dozen messages from people who ask us, for good recommendations for meal prep companies.
Yeah.
This is where they deliver, meal prep companies will deliver like a meal already ready to your door, many times frozen, sometimes fresh or whatever. You get the meal and it's got your, it's all counted out for your macros and everything's set up, right? Makes it easy. And I've just never found any that I really like. Well, after talking with Stan on the episode and hearing his philosophies around nutrition, we're going to give his meals a try. We're definitely going to give him a try. And
we had him create a link for all of you guys, those that have been asking and that were looking for something. We've created a link so you guys can go directly to that and order the meals. And man, I'm excited. I'm excited to try. I tell you right now, when I was competing, this would have been a thing I would have loved to have had. I mean, if he had this already going.
Convenience factors.
Easily digestible food. That's what he focuses on. Easily digestible food, because he realized if you can digest something and you minimize gut inflammation, you can maximize assimilation, build more muscle, burn more body fat, and optimize your hormones. And so the meals are all based on that, right? And so we did get ourselves an affiliate link. If you go to mindpumpmedia.com/vertical, then you can take a look at all these meals. And
there'll be a direct link in the show notes too, because I know that probably is going to be tough.
It may just be Sal's face only. Watch out.
Yeah, we got to change the picture. That was on. It's not optimized for the phone.
It's Sal. Yeah,
it's just me in the middle there.
But it's just looking tough.
His Abercrombie shirt, all hella small.
Aeropostal.
Yeah, I had a pump.
Anyways.
I had a pump. That's why that was Doug's shirt. But anyway, also, I do want to mention September we have launched our newest MAPS program, MAPS Strong. It's our strongman-inspired fitness program, fantastic for building strength, stamina, and boosting your metabolism. It's a great metabolism-boosting program. It is relatively advanced, but it is awesome. You can find it at mapsstrong.com. Now, for those of you who have different goals, or maybe you're not quite as advanced, we have other MAPS programs you could take a look at, or bundles. For example, our Super Bundle, which combines multiple MAPS programs and puts them in an order where you follow them one at a time for a full year. So it's literally 1 year of exercise programming. It's called the Super Bundle, but we have others as well. You can find all of those at mapsfitnessproducts.com. And without any further ado, here we are talking to Stan Efferding, the Rhino. So Stan, pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
Huge fan of yours. You're known as one of the more business savvy bodybuilders. Obviously known as being one of the strongest bodybuilders in the history of bodybuilding.
Not one of the, right?
Yeah. You're very outspoken, very honest, tend not to shy away from things. Very interesting individual. I want to know. I want to go back. I want to know what got you here. Like, what got you started with all this? And I know you had a sports background growing up. Like, what got you into bodybuilding and then the business of it?
Were you insecure like the rest of us?
Yep. Okay. Inferiority comp. 100 pounds in high school. So
100?
Oh, okay. Yes. I wrestled 98 as a freshman and sophomore, 106 as a junior. Yeah,
you might win on the smallest guy originally, because I was like 150. Sal, you were like 130, right?
No. When I graduated at 190, but I had started lifting at 14. So
yeah,
wow.
Well, it didn't work for me. When I got to college, I was 135, and I couldn't bench 135. I had to take the 45-pound plates off. And I know how embarrassing that was, because there was about 15 frat boys.
I remember being this kid. I was 20 years old and benching the 25s on each side. All I wanted was the big wheels. Like, let me get to the big wheels.
That was an accomplishment at the time. Who'd have thought? But it was just a matter of just so I could get like the water to move when it went down my body instead of straight. It actually moved a little bit. No chest, sunken chest. But it was really, it was just a matter of, you call it insecurity or whatever. I just wanted to be jacked. And that's kind of how the whole thing started. And I always had this, I've talked before, I've had this OCD personality growing up. I counted all my steps, and I was subject to these repetitive behaviors, tics and the like. And I did an interview recently with Dave Palumbo, and people were calling me out on my tics, thinking I was on crack or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah, every now and then they emerge. I was a sniffer, chronic. All my friends used to think I was on
doing
coke or something. Yeah, so I had these repetitive behaviors. People who know me recognize it, and they're nice enough not to bring it up. But as a kid, of course, you're always trying to hide these weirdness. But the benefit of that is those repetitive behaviors made me a great bodybuilder and powerlifter, because that's all that's about. Yeah. Is really just every single day counting things, sets, reps, meals, sleep, everything. So I wrote everything down, and I just started cranking away. And it took a long, long time, obviously. And the same thing in business. Repetitive behaviors. People think it's about home runs. It's about singles. It's dingers. Every single day, wake up and you do your little checklist. And that's the way I've been able to be successful both in bodybuilding and powerlifting, from someone who probably wouldn't be considered necessarily genetically inclined at my size. My pops is, 5'10", $160. But, you overcome that with just consistency and determination and repetitive behavior. So that's kind of really sums it up, is that I was just OCD and just chronically repeated the same things that I thought were going to work.
So true. Consistency is the absolute most important thing. And now when people tend to develop patterns, like you said, OCD type patterns, many times they'll say it's because it gives them a feeling of control, because maybe their lives feel chaotic. Was that true for you? Did you have a chaotic life? Did you feel like that maybe was a way for you to gain control, or was it not that?
Yeah, I don't know that it was chaotic necessarily, but I didn't like the uncertainty, and I still don't. I have to do my budget, and I have to have my checklist. I haven't competed in 5 or 6 years. I say all the time, I still have a checklist. I check my weight every single morning, and I've got all these little things that I do on a daily basis, whether it's my 10-minute walks or my vitamin D or my meal frequency and timing. I run around now telling everybody to get thermos so they can pack their Monster Mash in thermos so they can have their meal every 3 to 4 hours or whatever their schedule is. And so now that I've been traveling so much over the last year, I've been in 10 or 11 countries and 20 states and probably the last 9 months. And the biggest benefit to me is that I have these patterns, these behaviors where I'm always scheduling my meals, prepping them, taking them with me. I've got 4 or 5 thermos if I'm going to be gone for 12 hours, and I've got frozen meals in my checked luggage if I'm flying to Canada or to the UK or wherever. And so that's all taken care of, and now I can relax. Now I can focus. It was one of the reasons I hired and trained with Flex, was I could turn my brain off. And he would manage all of that for me. And all I had to do was go in and focus on training and just set up my schedule of nutrition and meals, etc.
That's very common with successful individuals, that they have their routines that they're very consistent about. It's a super, super common trait that you see with successful athletes and entrepreneurs and business people.
Wearing the same clothes every day.
Yeah, something like that. See, there you go, guys. Yeah. Making fun of my clothes. I'm almost there. I'm this close to wearing the same shit.
No, I'm that bad. I have to have the color coordinated T-shirts, and I wear the same damn thing every day. Now it's my Get Vertical shirt. If you look at any picture of me in the last 5 months, I'm wearing the same damn shirt, and I've got like 6 of them, and that's how my brain works. If there's a different one in there, then I'm confused for a minute.
Man.
It takes me a while.
You're making me feel so much better right now. But when you started working out, did your body respond quickly? When did you realize that you had potential for the sports of strength or bodybuilding? Not
at all. And here's the reason why, is because back then we didn't have the information we have now. And everything, it was the guy behind the counter, and he was dieting for a bodybuilding show. So that was your bodybuilder. And he was dieting on boneless, skinless chicken breast and broccoli and egg whites and whitefish. And so you started eating like that, or I did, and rice cakes. And it's no wonder I wasn't able to gain any mass. Plus, you went down and you got Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia Bodybuilding and started hammering away 6 days a week, 2+ hours a day.
I did the same shit.
Yeah, so you didn't realize all I was doing was breaking down muscle tissue and not rebuilding it. And it wasn't for, it was a couple, 3 years. My first competition, I weighed 158. It was the 160 and under competition. And,
was this bodybuilding or powerlifting?
Bodybuilding. Yeah, it took me 10 years to get strong enough to powerlift. I presumed that the stronger I got, the bigger I would get. Now, I've since learned that's not the case, but back then that's what I thought. And so I was doing singles, and no wonder I wasn't growing. I wasn't eating enough, and I was training too much. So the same problem. If I knew then what I know now, obviously we would have done that very different. And after a few years, I did come across someone who reversed those things for me. We trained less often. We ate more. And then I started to be able to gain weight as a result.
What was one of the biggest, like the first paradigm, I guess, changing moments with your training? Was it just the less workouts or the like you said, the more food? What did you have any of those moments where you're like, oh shit?
It was a combination of the two. I started noticing that I was actually getting stronger because I was training a little less often. I had more recovery time. You don't grow in the gym is the article I wrote many years ago, which I learned 27 years ago from a friend of mine. He told me that you don't grow in the gym. And I was like, really? I thought lifting weights made you bigger. And he had to educate me that, no, that's not the case. That's the stimulus. That's how you break down muscle tissue. And it was a combination. And none of this stuff happens in a vacuum. It's a symphony, an orchestra. And that's why in my vertical diet, I've got sleep, hydration, training, nutrition. You can't do any one by itself. And in the absence of optimizing any of those, it's going to make all the rest suffer. So I started improving my sleep. I started improving my nutrition. And again, that was packing food in my backpack so I could go to class. I'm loading in peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and hard-boiled eggs. Imagine what those smell like when you open them up in a Tupperware 4 hours later.
Ladies, I'm sure.
Everybody 10 rows up in class is looking around. I've got my hard-boiled eggs up there, and I'm like, sorry. But eating more food was a big deal. Now, of course, I'm pretty particular about the kinds of food I eat, but, of primary importance was calories. at that point. So
Yeah.
that's when I started to really see results.
Let's talk about genetics for a second, because we know how important genetics are for, bodybuilding or strength or performance or a lot of things that you can perform well at. Genetics play a significant role. And there's this belief that, bodybuilders and strength athletes have these insane genetics where they were automatically built and strong. And obviously what you're saying counters that. I mean, you're going into college, graduating high school at 100 pounds. That doesn't sound like great genes. But there are genetics in terms of how you respond to exercise or food, or even how you respond to anabolics and stuff like that. Like maybe touch on that a little bit. How big of a role do genetics play, and how big of a role do you think that played with you, or not a role with you?
Yeah, well, it's huge. I always say genetics reign supreme. Your mom and dad matter in this deal. And what I found is that lots of times I would come across training partners. I trained with Aaron Madron way back in the late 80s, and he was an IFBB pro, a fantastic pro. And, he would go out with his buddies, drink until 4 o'clock in the morning, and then he would show up at 7 to train with me, missing meals, missing sleep, breathing or sweating vodka while I'm trying to bench, and I'm breathing that in. But he was massive. I mean, this guy had 20-plus inch arms and 20-plus inch calves and 32-inch quads, and he was just massive. And I realized somewhere along the way that I wasn't that guy. And I was going to have to do everything 100%. And that meant every night of sleep. I never went out drinking, and I never stayed up late. I always was in bed on time, even all through college and thereafter when I was working in bodybuilding. But I also kept my day job because I never thought I would make money at bodybuilding. A lot of people will reach out to me and talk about their bodybuilding career. And I'm like, whoa, hold up. Bodybuilding is not a career. It's a hobby. And even if you become a great bodybuilder, you're still going to have to be a pretty good businessman in today's environment to create your own financial opportunities. Nobody's going to knock on your door and say, here you go, pal, just lift, eat, and train.
Yeah,
eat, sleep, and train, and I'm going to pay you for it.
Yeah, so many bodybuilders don't know that. They don't understand that, but you understand it early on. Obviously, what were you? When did bodybuilding become a money maker for you? What were you doing before that? What was your career in your business?
I never made money in bodybuilding until after I was retired. It seems odd. Years after I was retired from bodybuilding. Because I never monetized it that way. Because I kept my day job, and I pursued other career avenues. It was a hobby for me. It was a passion. I wanted to be a pro bodybuilder, obviously. And of course, when you're doing that in the early 90s, when they're only giving out one pro card at the USAs and one per weight class at the Nationals, and the weight class is everybody over 198. And you've got, the top 10 guys at Nationals, you're talking Flex Wheeler, Chris Cormier, Mike Francois. The list goes on and on. They're all on the front cover of magazines. They're still amateurs. And we hear a lot about that today. The quality and the depth of the competitors just aren't what they were in the early 90s, because pro cards are much more available, so there's a smaller talent pool.
Do you agree with that? Do you think
100%? Yeah. Those guys in the early 90s were ridiculous. And they were fighting for one card or two cards a year. Not 100.
Yeah, there was great bodybuilders that would have been pros or been trying to become a pro for 10 years, and we would have smoked right into it now, for sure, back then.
For sure. And that's not to say anything except for the fact that it was much, much harder to get that card. And now there's so many cards that you've got a smaller talent.
Well, plus way less shows, too, right? The amount of shows they were doing is, now you have shows going on almost every 2 weeks. There's like a show somewhere where there's...
And there was one class. It was bodybuilding.
Right.
Now you got figure, physique, bikini.
Classic.
Yeah, you've got a whole host of different avenues, which I think is fantastic that people can pursue their dreams and their talent. When I was a 135-pound guy, the only way to turn pro was to be 250 shredded at 6 foot. And so that was the goal. There was no 185. There was no 210. None of those opportunities existed. So that was the one goal, and that meant you had to get huge. You had to get up to 300 pounds and diet down to 250. And that became my obsession. Now,
having trained at such a high level for as long as you have, I mean, you've got to be, well, you're one of the strongest, if not the strongest bodybuilders now, and you're not a super young guy. You've been doing this for a long time. Means you've been training your ass off for a very, very long time. Has the training methodologies and the attitudes towards training, have you seen changes in trends? Because you've worked out, since the early 90s at a very, very high level. 90s, early 2000s and today, and you've been in the world of bodybuilding and strength, are you seeing these different trends and stuff happen?
What I saw working in the early 90s still works today. And the science is now supporting it. I think I was at a symposium recently, and one of the PhDs that was there said the bros were right. And that's what I discovered when I used to get in my car and take my trek down to Venice to watch those guys train back in the early 90s. Every single one of them trained twice a day, ate 7+ meals a day, slept 8-9 hours a night, and took a nap every afternoon.
Got a bunch of sun.
Every single one of them got a bunch of sun. I think they've got the Bob Bowl down at Firehouse Restaurant down there, and it's steak and rice. I didn't invent this thing, this whole vertical diet steak and rice thing. I don't claim to have invented it. I watched it happening 25 years ago right in front of my eyes. These guys were putting down mounds and mounds of steak. I tried the chicken, I tried the whitefish, I tried the egg whites, I tried the rice cakes, and it didn't work. And it still doesn't work today.
Right.
But I watched what these guys did. And every single one of them, in the same way Flex trained me in 2008. It was 2-a-day hypertrophy sessions, lots of volume, lots of frequency. I did notice that their intensity was less than what I was doing. When I say intensity, the heavy weights, all the muscle damage. These guys,
motor movements, all that stuff.
They prioritized recuperation. It's the law of repeated bouts. Frequency and volume was prioritized over damage.
Absolutely.
The delayed onset muscle soreness from 500-pound stiff-legged deadlifts didn't bode well for the law of repeated bouts.
I definitely think there's value in training like that, throwing it into your routine. But if that's all you ever do,
every single workout, every single set to failure with heavy weights, your accumulated fatigue you're not going to recover.
And what was a wrench in all that was because some people there's always individual variances, right? There's always those people, and it was
the Bulgarians,
because
they've weeded out all the people with weak central nervous system.
But like Dorian Yates hits the scene. He has a very different style of training, right? Going to failure. 1 set per exercise.
1 or 2,
Mike Menser, that whole, Arthur Jones mentality. And so then I feel like bodybuilding kind of started going in that direction a little bit with, one workout, each body part once a week type of deal. But I've been training people for 20 years. I train average people. So I don't work with bodybuilders or whatever, but I see what works with average people, and frequency and volume and monitoring intensity works great for most people. The whole hammer the shit out of someone real hard and let them, wait a whole week doesn't work for a whole lot of people. It's that frequency. Are you starting to see that come back now with the new bodybuilders? I'm
starting to see that come back. I'm forced into that now. I can't do what I used to do when I was powerlifting. There's just no way I can get under and grind under those big, heavy 600, 700-pound squat sets thinking that. Plus, I learned finally when I trained with Flex just how important it was. Just how much bodybuilding helped powerlifting and how much powerlifting hurt bodybuilding. I started to learn the difference, and I started to not power build anymore. I started to actually specialize. And when I trained with Flex, he wouldn't let me squat or deadlift, not one repetition of those things over the 10-week period that he worked with me for getting my pro card back in 2009. And that was the purpose of that, is it would have impaired or impeded or reduced the amount of volume and frequency that we could have done. And I was significantly more full and voluminous. My legs were larger. And I've told this story before.
Your legs changed a lot.
Changed a lot. In 2009 with Flex, they were 30 inches on stage. I was 254 pounds.
And your reps changed. You were doing 20 plus reps, right?
20 plus reps. The legs in particular liked the extra reps. And we weren't going to failure necessarily. It was mostly oxygen debt, lactic acid buildup. So it was hard work, but it wasn't mechanical failure in the sense that those heavy squats would be. And you find that a lot of guys, like Dorian didn't squat. He would leg press and hack squat. And one of the reasons is that once you hit the lumbar spine, deadlifting or squatting, you completely change the fatigue level and the amount of delayed onset muscle soreness in the recovery. And whether or not you call that central nervous system or what have you, we use that word, we throw it around like we know what it means, but we don't. But you can feel the fatigue. You're not recovering. And so, we made sure to do lots of volume, and my body responded to that. And what was interesting is recently I attended a seminar with John Meadows. He and I were both presenting with Charles Poliquin recently down in
great group
in Denver. Yeah, it was a good group. And he talked through his program, and it was very, very similar to what Flex and I did. He started with a mind-muscle connection exercise. We did one-legged leg extensions. Then he moved on to what he called his blast exercise. That would be his leg press, where he would get a significant amount of weight, and he'd do 4 sets there. But the first 3 sets were, a few reps from failure or less. And only the last set did he go to failure or do a drop set or, just pretty much push himself to the limit.
Failure is abused a lot nowadays. I mean, it's been abused a long time.
A lot. And particularly for the lower body is where, upper body, you can do a lot of damage to your back doing rows and chins and probably still recover within 72 hours. But the leg's a completely different animal, and probably a lot of that has to do with the spinal cord.
It is important to note, too, though, in defense of deadlifts and squats, when I work with most everyday average people, the functionality and the muscle building that comes from learning how to do those very fun, foundational human movements,
yes,
very important. Someone like you who mastered squatting and deadlifting because you power lifted for so long, you're going to go into
less of a priority.
Less of a priority. It's not a new stimulus for you. It's an old stimulus for you. Changing to a leg press or a hack squat or other movements, you're going to get some change in your body. You've been doing the other ones for so long.
Well, and you're also starting to utilize just the quad.
Yeah.
When I throw a bar,
because you got really good at it.
Yeah. When I throw a bar on my back, it's all about leverage. Now I'm incorporating the hips, the glutes, the spinal erectors,
the entire body.
I'm not interested in using one muscle group. I'm trying to get the entire body involved in the movement. So Flex made me use one muscle group. We brought our feet in and down on the leg press, so
how did that feel at first? Were you like, "Oh shit, my legs are shaking"?
I was pressing 14 plates aside for 20 reps, and then I come in and train with Flex. I'm down to 6 plates aside because he had adjusted the rest periods. He had moved my feet down to where it was all quads, and you could just feel the quad tearing off the bone. Let me do the 2 more steps on John Meadows' program that I thought was very similar to what Flex and I did. We said we had the mind-muscle connection leg extension, single leg extension. Then we moved to a blast exercise, which was the leg press for us, and we worked up, got some decent weight on us, 20 rep sets, maybe 2-minute rests. And then we'd move on to a pumping exercise. Flex had us do, say, one-legged step-ups with a band on a box. And it was just rep after rep after rep, and the amount of blood and volume that put into the muscle. So that was a pumping exercise.
I want to throw up just listening to that.
Yeah. And then we would finish, John finishes with what he calls stretching. And Flex would have us kneel down in between sets or finish with a walking lunge, which would put an incredible amount of stretch on the quadricep.
Especially after it's pumped.
And you could feel the muscle almost like it's tearing off the bone when you squat down in between sets of leg presses or you do the walking lunges to finish. Just that tearing and stretching. And I don't mean that in the literal sense, the tearing is, but it's that full range of motion. And for hypertrophy, that's optimal.
So important.
Yep, to get that full range of motion. Anything that you need to do. I always had tight ankles, calves, and lack of mobility in my ankles. So we would have to stretch those first on a calf machine, or we would have to use an angle plate, or I would be pushing off my toes, just so I could get my quads into a stretch position without transferring the load onto my glutes because my ankles were the limiting factor for flexibility. So that was really interesting to hear that. It was, because Flex isn't a scientific guy. And people dog him all the time because he's not book read and he doesn't quote studies. But I don't know anybody. They say that, blind men hear better and deaf people see better. Flex is one of those kind of guys. He's the kind of guy who is street smart. And his eye is incredible. And we would pose after every workout and weigh in every single day. And he would watch me train. And he was consciously measuring all of that and observing that. And I told the story one time when my teeth were hurting from all the steak that he had me eat. I was eating top sirloin steak on a Foreman grill.
Were you cooking it or what?
Yeah, I was cooking it on a Foreman grill, and so it was always tough. But he had me eating steak like 7 times a day.
Holy shit!
That's almost all we ate, and for protein source, and which was hugely beneficial as it turns out for me because
like cholesterol, creatine,
everything. Right. Yeah, the iron, the B12, the zinc, everything was great about that, but my teeth started hurting. And so I switched to whitefish and chicken breast for a couple of days. And I went into the gym and I'd lost 3 pounds and I was posing with Flex and he's like, "What's going on?" He's like, "Your weight's down. You look flat. You were lethargic today during your workout." And I'm looking around. I can't even look him in the eye.
Now were the macros the same? Same grams of protein and everything?
Yeah. I kept everything the same. I'll bet the calories did go down a little bit because the whitefish and chicken is leaner than the steak. But I don't think it was significant enough to lose 3 pounds in 2 days.
No.
But nonetheless, so he looks over. I was training with Keith Williams at the time, and Keith's looking up at the ceiling because neither one of us could, look Flex in the eye and lie to him. And so finally I told him, I said, my teeth hurt. And he's like, suck it up. And he said, get a meat grinder. And I'm like, wow. What a novel idea. Yeah. So that's in my vertical diet today. I did that for Thor and Shaw. They use a meat grinder to grind their meat. That's why the Monster Mash. See, all of this stuff came from my experience with, I think some of the greatest coaches and trainers and in the world.
Explain this Monster Mash. I've heard you reference it a couple of times. I've heard it in your videos. What is it?
Yeah, well, it's red meat, and it's it's either ground bison or ground beef, mixed with white rice, which was our staple with Flex because it's easy to digest. It was easy in my stomach. I could get in a ton of calories. He had me on 600 plus grams of carbs, dieting for a show. I was losing body fat because our workload was so high. I needed to fuel it with something, and I can't fuel it with bread, pizza, pasta, pancakes, because it'll blow out your stomach, or even oatmeal. It's what I found from personal experience with the athletes that I work with. When they start stuffing oatmeal in themselves, it has kind of a cumulative effect of creating bloating and gas and indigestion.
Food intolerances, and I think a lot of people learn this as they get older. You can't get away with that shit as you...
No. And that's one of the first things I found with Thor and Shaw. Two guys who have to consume damn near 10,000 calories a day. I've got them over 1,100 grams of carbs a day. And I can't feed them foods that are going to cause distress to their gut. So I found the foods that were the easiest to digest, the low gas vegetables, the bone broth, to get back to the Monster Mash. In order for them to be able to eat that much food, I had to make it easier for them to eat, more palatable. The amylase production, the just being able to palate the food, to chew it and swallow it was the first challenge. So when you add some bone broth into the white rice, a moist white rice, into a ground bison, which is a really easy, it's even better than ground beef in terms of its digestibility because it's so soft. And so that was kind of the base meal, was the Monster Mash. And they were able to accumulate a ton of calories with a very high, biological value nutrient term. We talked about the B vitamins and the iron and the zinc. And they could get the bulk of their calories from that and have no indigestion. They became regular, which is one of the big things I focus on. Because usually, as powerlifter, working with big guys who have to eat lots of food, most of us are running to the bathroom all the time.
No, I bet.
From a whole assortment of things, whether it be protein powders or bars full of sugar alcohols or casein, allergies, or breads, pasta, pizza, pancakes, all those things that cause indigestion and gas and bloating. So I tried to eliminate that and make them more efficiently able to use those calories. I found they could eat a little bit fewer calories and still maintain their weight.
They're assimilating more.
I'd say their body's using it.
It's funny you say this because, well, two things. In reference to Flex and his knowledge, I'll take wisdom over knowledge any day.
100%.
And wisdom really is just knowledge plus experience is really what it is. And it's more valuable. The other thing, too, is, a lot of the stuff you're saying, strength athletes have been... Vince Gironda, who was the scientist of bodybuilders way back in the day, advocated for these very high cholesterol, protein, red meat, and full fat dairy, egg yolk type of diets. And this is the way bodybuilders ate back then, and this is how they built a lot of muscle. And then we got a lot of misinformation about, eating cholesterol is this, that, and the other. Watch your sodium. That's another big one I know you talk about, is this whole eat low sodium, which sodium is, especially if you train and sweat, you should probably eat a lot of sodium. It'll give you more strength and make you, much healthier as a result.
100%.
But it's funny you talk about gut health. When we first started our podcast about 4 years ago, we were talking about the benefits of monitoring or making sure that you have good gut health for people who want to build muscle and burn body fat, not just for people who just want to be healthy. And a lot of people laughed at us and thought that was silly. And I'm like, look.
Yeah, it's just for hippies.
Your gut, that's the membrane between, when you eat something, it's not in your body. That's a hole that goes from your mouth to your anus. When it gets absorbed through the gut, that's when it becomes a part of your body. If you take care of your gut, you assimilate more food and you can build more muscle and burn more body fat. And now we're starting to see people like you, very influential people, start to promote that message, which I think, I'll tell you what, some of the worst gut health issues I've ever seen in my life are people in the strength building, muscle building world.
Yeah.
It's like an epidemic.
Well, and also your immune system improves.
Oh, yeah.
I remember what it was like. I put my body through torture. And with the performance-enhancing drugs, on top of the horrible diet, just the eating everything you can kind of diet, you're sick all the time. Every 3 or 4 months, your liver's always taxed. I get blood tests every month for the last 12 years. I know exactly what happens depending on how I eat and what I use and compete in the sport. And now I'm able to use those lessons with my athletes, and I'm able to actually watch their liver enzymes come down, their appetite improve, their
just
immune
from
system,
the food.
Just from the food.
Wow.
A few of the things in my diet contribute to that. You mentioned the salt, sodium chloride, hydrochloric acid, digestion's big.
Do you have them take HCl pills when they're eating?
Some of them I do. Yeah, I recommend it to a lot of folks. It's in the diet program. I talk about it. I just did a rant recently on stomach acid, on low stomach acid, and how that affects digestion, and creates autoimmune disorders. I've had people on antacid prescription medication for years who could come off within a week.
I went through that process myself.
Yeah.
And started introducing HCl pills was a game changer for me.
Game changer. Yeah. And I think the performance benefits are just a side effect of good digestion.
God, it's so refreshing to hear that coming from someone like you. You never hear people, big, strong, bodybuilder types or people in that space talk about it in that way. It's always the wellness people that nobody wants to look like that say that kind of stuff.
And I've been able to, I've lived through it, and then I've been able to utilize it. Most powerlifters, they'll weigh in and they'll head straight to IHOP. And that puts them in a really bad situation, particularly if they lost a significant amount of water, and then they end up in a position where they're cramping, their body's not digesting the food. So I'm very particular about what people refeed on, what Hawthorne Bryan eat preparing, going into the world's strongest man in Manila, and actually the hydration protocol that they used. I worked with Camille LeBlanc this year, CrossFit national champion, and Ben Smith, another CrossFit, and Becca Voigt. And all of them, Ben Smith in particular, about a month before regionals, he suffered heat stroke. And he reached out to me and he said, I'm down. He says, I feel like I've got rhabdo, I've got heat stroke, I can't go outside, I'm tired, I'm sick, my gut hurts. And so I reached out to Dr. Sandra Grodik's group in the Heat Institute, and their thermoregulation experts. She's a PhD in hydration. And they gave us, they helped me with a hydration protocol, which is a huge component of recovery and fueling yourself during training, and so that's when I started promoting the what we call like a cyclic dextrin. I do the fructose and dextrose. They do dextrose and maltodextrin, but a blend of two carbs doubles the rate at which you can absorb the carbohydrates.
Versus if it's just one.
And then they add sodium, it goes to 3. Rather than 1 gram per minute of glucose absorbed, you can go to 2 grams with 2 carbohydrate sources. You can go to 3 grams with the salt, and you can go to 4 grams, as much as 4 grams when you add a little bit of caffeine to that. And I'm not a huge coffee fan because of its impact on digestion and how people become dependent on it and end up lacking sleep and hydration. But when used strategically, it can be a performance enhancer. So, and I got a lot of this from George Lockhart, who trains Conor McGregor and John Jones. I mean, George has trained everybody and helped them do water cuts, and he's the nutritionist for these people. And years ago, I thought he was one of the best in the business, and so I hired him. I called him up, and I flew him out to Las Vegas, and I had him help me work with a pro fighter that I was training for a fight. And I had probably done water cuts for just about every world record holder in every weight class in powerlifting up to that point. But I know what my strengths and weaknesses are, and I had never trained an athlete who had to recover from a water deficit weigh-in and perform in a cardiovascular performance.
Yeah, different.
Very different, 1 rep as compared to putting in 20 minutes in the ring. And so I brought him out, and we carefully put together a rehydration program, which was very similar to what Dr. Godek's group recommended to me on behalf of Ben Smith, and that I utilized with Camille and Hawthorne Shaw. And it was that the blend of carbohydrates, the sodium, and then the timing, and then understanding the absorption rates. You can't just glug that thing down.
I was going to ask that. Did they measure how it's getting absorbed?
They do. They look at the rate of absorption, and then they have you sip that drink over a period of time, and then give yourself a little bit of a delay. They'll even this is kind of where the 10-minute walk came from, to be honest with you. George Lockhart would have his athletes, after they would rehydrate, he wouldn't let them lay down in a bed. He would make them move around. He would have them take a brisk walk. So the legs were driving those mTOR pathways, right, to bring the glycogen, the glucose into the muscle without the necessity of the insulin key. And so he would use that, and then they would rest for a while, and then they would have another drink, and then they'd walk around, and before they would start having a meal. And when I was implementing that with athletes, they were recovering better, much, much better, having more energy, maintaining their weight, gaining their weight back. Camille, over the course of 5 days with 3 competitions a day in CrossFit in the finals, she gained a pound. Well, when does that happen?
Never.
Yeah. And that's because of the hydration. And she was eating Monster Mash too, which I was excited about.
So this is really fun to get into this, because I used to talk a lot about sodium and water. When I got into competing, so I was men's physique pro, right? And I got into competing, and I found the sodium and water game was everything.
Yeah.
And I don't even think that I mastered that at all. So if you were to walk me through a protocol, if you were getting me ready to peak on stage, and then so what would my sodium intake, and I know there's going to be an individual variance as far as how much, but like how much are you pushing me in getting ready for the show, and then peak week, what does that kind of look like, the water and sodium? What would you do to do with me?
Now we're talking a very different thing.
Right. No, I know. I was waiting. I wanted you to finish that, but I had to ask you
and
this.
Appearance is two completely different things.
Totally.
So
That's a good point to make.
Yeah, I do want to get a hydration. I do want to get an athlete get some carbs and salt back in their system after they've dehydrated for a bodybuilding show. But I got to be careful how much water I put in them now, and make sure that they don't start to, like you say, smooth out or get too much water inside of them. So I'm not a huge fan of I think that most of what people do for dropping water or trying to get lean for a bodybuilding show is to compensate for not being in shape.
Agreed.
Nowadays, the preps are 16 plus weeks. It used to be that people would think 8 to 10 weeks they could get prepped for a show. And especially with the men's classic bodybuilding now, I mean, they just want you so shredded and dry that you just have to prep longer. And that's the first thing I caution competitors about is like, look, you need to, like Dorian said, he was ready a month out.
Yeah.
And when Flex had me training, I was ready a month out. And we were actually fighting not to lose weight.
Right.
We were increasing calories, but kept our workload high. The metabolism takes off. And in that way, you can avoid having to do any of the quote-unquote tricks, the carb depletion, carb loading, sodium deplete, sodium load. And so I really don't play that game. I get them in shape on time, and then I may put just a few carbs in them based on how they look and how they feel. But, Flex and I even made that mistake after all these many years. 4 or 5 days before the Olympia, he did a photo shoot with Per Bernal, and I posted the pictures just from my iPhone and a video, I think, on social media, and he looked incredible. I mean, just veins, dry, cross-striated. I mean, he just looked amazing. And he was 214. He had to weigh 210, I think, at the weigh-ins. So Friday morning, we wake up, he's still 214. He has to weigh 210. The weigh-ins at 3 in the afternoon. We could have done a lot of things different, but instead, we popped a mild diuretic. Well, on Flex, that pulled very, very hard because of his kidneys. And he ended up weighing in at 203.
Wow.
That afternoon.
Wow.
The next day, he weighed in at 203.
Wow.
He couldn't recover from it. And so he's backstage, had no pump, was completely flat. And of course, as you know, the muscles pull away from the skin and give that appearance of flatness. You don't see any dryness, any definition. And this is generally what happens to a lot of people who end up getting deflated when they're up there trying to manipulate water and sodium. You want to be full, and women do this in particular, and then they end up shaking. They should be tight and full. The muscles should be pushing against the skin.
Yeah.
So it was a real disappointment for him. It's not like he was up there necessarily with the expectation he was going to win, but he certainly 4 days prior looked just ridiculous, dry and grainy and shredded. And so we make the same mistakes after both of us, 30 years of experience. That amateurs make.
Well, there's a real art to that when you think about it.
There really is.
When you are that lean, I mean, the most subtle difference can make a huge difference on how you look because there's not as much room for error on a guy who's 3% body fat.
And we know that when you try and get, 2% better, you end up 10% worse. The vast majority of time, that's what happens. I've been backstage and guys are like, I went and had a cheeseburger and fries last night with a soda, and look at my veins, and they're showing me their forearm. Well, then they pop their shirt off and they look like they're 7 months pregnant. And I'm like, well, there you have it. Right? So,
I don't think I really never felt like I presented the best version. I mean, I did enough to make it up to the IFBB level, but I never felt like I presented the best version of me. It was always the night before, the night after. I was like, God damn it, why did I just...
Even the most experienced people, 7-time Mr. Olympia Phil Heath, look what happened to him at the finals. Look how watery he was.
Let's talk about that. Did you watch the show?
I watched the show, and and he's with one of the most experienced coaches in the business, Hani, who's been through this many, many, many times. I'm saying that it's really hard to trick the body. It's part of what everything that I work on in my program is that there's no games or gimmicks or tricks or magic, and it's really the fundamentals. And I think that I had heard he had some problems going into the show, and so maybe they did some things that to try and compensate for that. But obviously he was sweating a lot. That's not optimal,
right?
And he had lost the definition in his lower abdominal
big
area
time
from the bloating. So. That's difficult. And I can't speculate on that. I don't know behind the scenes what he did or he didn't do. I can tell you that even the best are up there trying to fine-tune things and end up going backwards.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so I tend to be conservative in that fashion. It didn't answer your question about what I do for water and sodium and carbs the last 24 to 48 hours before a show, because you can't really paint with a broad brush on that thing. You got to look at your individual athlete's conditioning, and that's the big thing about training people is anybody can copy and paste a program, but you need to check in, get feedback. Even with Brian Shaw, he started the program, the vertical diet. He lost like 16 pounds of fat. Everybody saw him post a selfie with his shirt off, and they were like, whoa, what's going on? First time they've ever seen Brian with his shirt off, and he's jacked, and he's starting to get massive. Well, he reached out to me and said, look, Stan, he said, I'm losing my 5th gear. He said, under these 1,200-pound yokes, he said, I don't feel as stable. And so immediately we switched gears. I took him off the top sirloin, put him on the ribeye, and put some bacon in his breakfast. And within less than a week, he was like, oh, okay, it's back. Mm. I mean, you have to be, as a coach, like you say, with wisdom, with experience, able to make these kind of changes. I didn't have to do that with Thor.
Do you see common mistakes? So I think that's what I was searching for from you, is that, because you're right, there's such an individual variance for everybody, and I know there's not a cookie-cutter answer for that. But there was some things when I got into the space that, because I was unfamiliar, I didn't follow bodybuilding as closely as Sal did. But as I got into it, I saw a lot of people making what I thought were huge mistakes. And one of those, and you talk about this, which I think is fascinating, is the sodium. Is they get on these preps, whether it be 8-week to 12-week long, and all of a sudden they start reducing sodium already in their diet, and you're already you're making your meal. So most people don't understand that if you eat out, you're already quadrupling your sodium intake. So then you go from somebody who occasionally or maybe a lot eats out to all of a sudden making all your meals. So the reduction in your sodium already is significant.
Oh, yeah.
And then you get into a prep and then you start tapering off. And I was just like, this is...
I talked about this in a rant regarding sodium, that when people go to clean eating, they end up in salt depleted and don't add salt to their diets. Right. They're actually depleting sodium.
That's connected to mortality.
Yes.
Too low of sodium is not good for you.
100%. Yeah, there's a dramatic increase in all-cause mortality when you get under 3 grams of sodium a day, yet the American Heart Association recommends 2.5, and it was at 1.5 for a while. Ugh. And not to say anything of the quality of life for those poor individuals that think that that's the biggest factor. It's multifactorial, but what we found from the research, and I just posted a post the other day, is that when you get adequate calcium, and vitamin D is a big driver of that because it dramatically improves calcium absorption, and when you get adequate potassium, then your blood pressure stabilizes, normalizes. Those are 2 biggies. Of course, sleep and a CPAP was another giant one. Sure. I've got 400-pound guys with normal blood pressure because I have 4,700 milligrams of potassium in their diet, because I have adequate vitamin D in their diet, which wasn't there previously. I did blood tests for Thor, I did blood tests for Shaw, I did blood tests for Dan Green. All of these guys were at 25 or 30 in their vitamin D, and the range is 30 to 100. They need to be 60 to 80. And so it tells you how deficient they were in vitamin D. And a lot of them iodine, because they sweat a lot. And that's really important, both as part of the pathway for hydrochloric acid production and for immune system support and for their thyroid. So all of these things were huge. That's why I include them in my diet program, because they have so many different benefits. So it's a lot of stuff.
Well, how common is exactly what you're talking about because you trained a lot of people. what are some of the most common things that you have to adjust, like right out the gates?
Yeah, there you go. Vitamin D is always a biggie. Obviously, sodium. What's really interesting is you mentioned something. People have been making these mistakes, and mostly women. They're the ones that start over-restricting and create these conditions where they have deficiencies. They won't eat red meat. They won't eat dairy. They won't take in sodium. They won't take in fruit. And basically, they're on a white fish and broccoli diet. The 4 things I just mentioned, dairy for calcium, which is hugely beneficial for metabolism. People don't realize that. Red meat, iron, and B12, particularly with women. What do they go into an HRT clinic and get shots for every week?
Right.
Yeah. Iron and B12 and D3 usually. So they create these deficiencies for themselves, and then salt. And they're training, 2 40-hour sessions of cardio a day, which is another thing that dramatically suppresses their
metabolism.
Their metabolism.
We should talk about this, because that was another thing that blew my mind, was looking at my peers hammering away on the cardio machine, and I'm thinking to myself, we want as much muscle on our bodies when we get on stage to present. And here you are 8 weeks out doing hours of cardio. You're sending a signal to your body that is not advantageous to have a bunch of muscle on it.
No,
what the fuck are you doing?
You're absolutely 100%. The body responds to the stimulus provided. And if you're going to ask your body to do an hour of cardio, then it's going to get rid of that muscle. It's heavy. It has high oxygen demand, high water demand. It's
expensive.
Not efficient. Yes. Also, what you find is that they wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning after 5 hours of sleep to do this. So now they've suppressed their thyroid, and all of this works contrary for them. The more they sleep, the more fat they'll burn, the more lean muscle mass they'll retain, the less ghrelin they'll release, so they're not going to be as hungry. I prioritize sleep over cardio all the time. I don't have any steady state cardio in my program. It's not for anybody. I do the 10-minute walks, and it's not necessarily cardio. The 10-minute walks post-meal is to improve insulin sensitivity and digestion and decrease bloating and gas. And again, I'm trying to drive those quads to start using a different pathway, because a lot of the big guys I train have insulin problems, and a lot of the little people I train that are dieting, they have metabolic adaptation issues, and I want to be able to feed them more food. So I got to get them absorbing those nutrients better, the nutrient partitioning.
Well, by the way, there's a lot of wisdom in looking at old cultures and the customs that they have. And most old cultures have a custom of walking after a meal. It's a very common occurrence in many of these old cultures. There are muscles that travel from the hip, the hip flexor complex, and that travel over and through your gut or around your gut. Just flexing those stimulates movement through your intestines, not to mention gravity. If you're standing, it helps. That's why your anus is at the bottom of your body, not at the top.
Yeah.
And so eating and then sitting or laying down, terrible. Absolutely terrible for digestion.
100%. So what happens on both ends? When we're talking about big athletes that need to eat a lot of food, we're worried about insulin resistance, right? Fatty liver and all the cascade of events that occurs as a result. They stop putting on muscle and they start gaining more fat, and they get more tired and everything else. When we're dieting, we're worried about metabolic adaptation. And so these methods of getting adequate sodium, getting adequate iodine, getting fruit, which stimulates the liver, increases body temperature. Now there's one to combat metabolic adaptation, increasing body temperature. And we see this, I put the research in my diet about how anesthesiologists, when they measure the body temperature, when they bring somebody back from an operation, they measure the body temperature. If it's too low, they'll infuse fructose into their IV to bring their body temperature up before they bring them back.
Yeah, the way through the process of how the liver converts it.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. And, obviously too much fructose is a problem.
Yeah, you don't want to drink a bunch of sodas. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But I talk in my diet about, an optimal dose. And so I use just a few ounces of fructose. We're talking 10, 12 grams. 3 or 4 times a day. Now, we know the liver can handle, 7,500 grams a day of fructose pretty consistently. So 3 or 4 times a day, I get 10, 12 grams of fructose, 3 or 4 ounces of fruit, whether it's a half an orange or it's 3 ounces of orange juice. I use the oranges for people who are dieting, who have problems with hunger and cravings, and I use the orange juice for people who are trying to gain weight because it improves appetite, increases appetite. But it's not so much, this isn't a 12-ounce glass 3 times a day. It's not so much fructose that it's going to start to cause fatty liver problems and insulin resistance. Although fructose has less insulin release, requires less insulin release than glucose. And it ameliorates the effect of something like glucose, like a bread or something like that, or pasta. It actually reduces the insulin release, the amount of insulin released, and the length of time at which it stays elevated. So there are some significant benefits when used
Properly.
And so these are some of the methods that I use in the diet, and for those reasons, and with the research I've provided in my personal experience. And I mentioned that titrating that fructose throughout the day was one of the things that I watched bring my AST, ALT down, my liver enzymes.
Oh, wow.
And when my liver enzymes were elevated, I would lose my appetite. And how would I discover this? Well, every time I took D-ball before a powerlifting competition. So this is wisdom. This is practical experience talking to you without any regrets. How did I manage that situation? I managed it with proper nutrition. So I had to compensate for the things that I was doing to myself. And I talked about this in my video on if you want to be healthy, don't compete. Because in any sport,
I'm so glad you said that.
Anything is many times,
right? Anything extreme is not
anything extreme. And I'm talking about 9-year-old kids in badminton blowing out anterior cruciate ligaments. So there is no sport, if you're going to compete competitively at a high level, that doesn't have some compromise. And so my goal is to try and manage that as best I can with better sleep, better nutrition, better hydration, all of those things. I'm not saying that competing in any sport is going to be healthy or optimal. Even long distance runners, long considered the bastion of
that's
health.
probably the worst.
That's one of the worst. Yes. They end up with the
oxidative damage to their heart.
Yes.
And all the joint issues, dude, for pounding for so many hours.
100%. And so you have to, in my joint issues, and I talked about that in my rant on how I fixed my knees, because I was in there training so heavy so often that I had to get more movement. And I started using the banded presses and getting the 20 rep sets, set after set, to try and help with chronic tendonitis. And so I'm big on restorative movement, even when I'm working with powerlifters who historically, don't run if you can walk, don't stand if you can sit, and don't stay awake if you can sleep. That's the mentality, and then eat as many calories as you can. And then you end up in one of those situations with, high insulin resistance and fatty liver, and you just eventually you kind of top out at what your potential is because your body the nutrient partitioning isn't right, and you're not building muscle tissue. And so even with those guys, I have to be really careful that they're doing some movement that doesn't necessarily isn't counterproductive to strength. And so, I might do some prowlers, some concentric movement, whether it be a recumbent bike under a little bit of tension, 30-second sprint, 30-second rest.
You're eliminating the negative to minimize the muscle damage.
Exactly, but I'm pushing all the blood in there that's necessary and activating the lymphatic system, which is something that you have to move to get all the trash out of the system. And I do that like 3 times a day for 10 minutes. This isn't a 40-minute session because the frequency is optimal.
Absolutely.
That's why the 3 10-minute walks a day. That's why I have the fructose 3 or 4 times a day. It's almost like a doctor would dose medication to you. It has a half-life. Fructose has a half-life. Your digestion isn't all day. I can't eat all my fiber for breakfast and expect it to do me much good at dinner. And so I throw 4 carrots into a meal, and people are like, 4 carrots? What's that going to do for you? Well, 4 carrots 4 times a day is my carrot a day, but it optimizes the digestion.
Especially when you're eating a large amount of food and you're a large athlete.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, you're eating 6,000 calories a day. It's hard to do that with two or 3 meals.
It really is.
Yeah.
It is. And meal frequency is important too. I mean, it's a whole nother avenue with the intermittent fasting thing that's coming on. If I've got an athlete that's lifting weights and breaking down muscle tissue, I don't want them going 16 hours without food. There's no mechanism in the body to store protein. And no, they're not going to lose 10 pounds of muscle, but it's not optimal for the body to need repair, to reach for the amino acids, and they're not there, and it has to wait.
Now, have you ever utilized, because I've seen this both with myself and with people that I've worked with, because of the indirect health benefits of fasting occasionally, I've noticed people respond better when they do throw in the food and they throw in the more frequency. I wouldn't incorporate it during a heavy training session, but more of an off-season.
You hit the nail on the head. You said occasionally. And this isn't something I do
intermittently, like it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
That's what we all talk about.
And it also depends on the athlete. Are they experiencing insulin resistance? I run a blood test. I look at the HA1C. I look at their fasting blood sugars, and I say, we got a problem here. We need to address it. That's a good time to throw in intermittent fasting while you reduce the massive loads and maybe have them do a little less volume and frequency to get and do more of the pumping exercises that I mentioned, getting those legs moving more often, so I can use the mTOR pathways. I can start to get their insulin resistance down. That's the first thing we did with Thor, was take him down from 425 pounds to 395. When I first started working with him, I said, we're going to have to take 30 pounds off of you. And he was like, what? Take 30 pounds off of me? I need to be 440. And I said, well, I can't get you to 440 lean and strong and hard until I get you down to 395 and get your insulin sensitivity right.
Very good point.
And then get you back up there using the kinds of foods that won't repeat the same problem. Pizza, pasta, pancakes, all that kind of stuff. So we took all of that out. And then when he went back up, I think some of you may have seen, he squatted like 960 something with ridiculous. A six-pack. Yeah. Takes his shirt off and he's just yoked.
That's fucked up.
Yeah. At some point, when you compete, like I said, if you want to be healthy, don't compete. At some point, he's going to have to add that extra weight to endure the load from his training, as did Shaw. And at some point, your bikini girl that's getting ready for a show, the last 30 days, is going to have to suck it up. But you certainly don't want to strip muscle off of her, but she's going to have to be at a deficit. She's going to be hungry. She's going to lose, a little more weight than what would be healthy necessarily to show on stage. But when you do it correctly and you keep sodium in and you keep calcium in and you keep fructose in, and you get adequate potassium and, all of those things and you get iron and B12 and she keeps her red meat in the diet, then there's no rebound or very little. She can easily, refeed, reverse diet after that and not have the edema and the massive fat gain because of the suppressed the metabolic adaptation and the lowered metabolism.
I love what you're saying, Stan, because for a long time in that space, in that world, it was, you have to make your health go bad in order for you to do now, which is different than your message, which is saying competing itself not healthy. However, if we approach it as healthy as possible, you'll do better. You'll perform better. You'll
minimize your damage.
Yeah. Right. And that's a very different message from what in the past was kind of kamikaze. Like throw everything at it, go for it, and poor health is supposed to happen, so let's just go for it. Yeah. Very, very different. How rare is someone like you in your space? You take a very meticulous, smart approach to everything. Holistic approach to everything. You're again, you make health one of the priorities because it improves performance and appearance. How rare are you in your space?
I don't know. When I came in, we talked about the fact that we're fortunate that are so many really bright, really experienced people now that athletes have access to. So I think very quickly people are starting to see that there's some good information out there, and it's starting to filter to the top. Yeah. So I think it's more and more common. I think that the Lane Nortons of the world, and certainly the Greg Nuckols of the world that are out there, they put out some really good information, and we might not all agree on everything. Lane's got the
sugar.
Yeah, sugar, and
we jab him all the time about that.
We're good friends with him. So.
Yeah. And I don't think he's driving that. He's just saying, look, that's not going to kill you. The calories is the first most important thing, and then the quality of the food, and then the meal timing, and then all of that. So at least he puts it into a hierarchy. But to me, again, it's a symphony. And if I'm doing an 80-20, or if it fits your macros, and one of the instruments isn't in tune, meaning as part of your 80-20, as part of your 20%, or if it fits your macros kind of deal, you're taking in something that's causing inflammation, vegetable oils, sugar, alcohols,
Pop-Tarts.
Maybe bread, Pop-Tarts. It depends on how you respond to them. It's been my experience that the vast majority of athletes I deal with do have digestion problems. Mm-hmm. Yep. And if I can remedy those first, and so I'm a little more particular. I don't let people have the 80-20, and I don't let them do if it fits your macros. I specify in my diet, I list exactly the foods I want them to eat. I'm very specific.
That's because you're fucking old and you've coached a lot of fucking people, bro. That's why. But that's where we come from all the time. We argue with a lot of these people. It's just like, wait till you've coached thousands of people and you see what the majority, and it's like, yes, your message is okay, that you're right. There is a hierarchy, and these certain things are not necessarily bad or evil foods. It's just most people have got issues.
Settings. And my program is intended to be simple, sensible, and the last part is the most important part, sustainable. And here's where there's a bit of a disagreement with what I propose, which is I list exactly the foods you need to eat. And what people are concerned about in terms of sustainability, having flexibility. if you're a dieter and you're forced, but if I'm recommending that you eat these foods and then you end up at a restaurant somewhere, or if your appetite is different one day and you want to make a change up, I offer up substitutions. But I'm cautious about what substitutions. That's not a pizza and it's not a cheeseburger. Right. It's another low FODMAP food, or it's a variant of the red meat type or style, or another ruminant animal that would provide you, again, the better fatty acid profile. So I do provide some variation in there. But I found a couple of things, particularly with the everyday person. They kind of want to be told what to do. Sure. Because they've been left to flounder and been given their own choices. That they're not very good at calorie control. We know that. Probably as much as 50%, and even clinicians are off by as much as 15 or 20% in terms of calorie control.
You cannot depend on self-reporting at all.
No.
Someone self-report, I don't eat that much. It's always off.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and I hate to get in front of myself, but I'm developing an app currently. I've been saying this for 6 months, but these things take forever. Yeah. Which is still probably 90 days away. And in my app, my clients will be able to just take a picture of their meal. And it'll be time and date stamped. So me as a coach, I can go back to any day of the week and I can just scroll down and see everything they ate and when they ate it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm able to quickly at a glance look at that and see the types of foods and the quantity, and then make an assessment, as to what changes they need to make based on, how they're responding for the week. So
no, I think if someone wants to get to a point where they're making better choices for themselves as an individual, they have to start with a structure. You have to that's how you learn what's good and what isn't good, and what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Then you can get to the point where I think you could do that if it fits your macros after. But I think if you jump into that and just focus on proteins, fats, and carbs, you're missing a lot.
It doesn't address your immune system.
That's right.
It doesn't address your gut hehealth. Those are two huge things. And It doesn't address micronutrients. How many people are getting 4,700 milligrams of potassium a day? Next to none. You have to be deliberate about that. And I send my athletes exactly what they need to eat in order to get that in a day. For me, it's 1 baked potato a day, around 1,000 milligrams, 10 ounces of spinach a day, another 1,500 milligrams. And I do that by mixing about 5 ounces or 2 cups of spinach with 4 ounces of orange juice and maybe a little bit of ice water. And I blend it in a bullet blender, a Ninja, and it's very easy to drink with a meal, but now you're getting 2,000 milligrams of potassium in that meal because you've got your 4 ounces of orange juice and your 2 cups of spinach. So now I just mentioned the orange juice, or an orange. That's another 500 milligrams a day of potassium. I add to that at least half a cup of yogurt a day. I might get another 300 or 400 milligrams of potassium from a half cup or a cup of yogurt. And then throw on top of that maybe a serving of salmon, another 700 to 900 milligrams of potassium. I just counted there, and I'm probably not quite at 4,700. Everything I just said, you have to eat every day to get there. And I'm not a fan of the supplements, the potassium supplements. They're usually only 100 milligrams to begin with. But now what do you take them with? And are they well digested and absorbed? A lot of people take supplements. They don't necessarily take them with a meal. Mm-hmm. And if your hydrochloric acid isn't sufficient, you're not going to absorb minerals.
Nutrients don't ever appear in nature by themselves.
No.
And
there's cofactors. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And like vitamin D is a great one. Vitamin D without fat, you don't consume a little bit of fat with it, even in supplement form, not going to get absorbed as well. Right. And that's because in nature, how do you find vitamin D? Usually in fatty fish or fatty foods, or of course from the sun.
And you just said the protein is what stimulates the pepsin release, which increases hydrochloric acid, decreases pH, and makes the acidic environment of the stomach such that it can absorb those vitamins and minerals.
Right.
All of that comes together. I always make sure that people, if they're going to take a supplement, that they take it in a high acid environment, HCl, pepsin with a meal, etc.
Yeah, I mean, having low sodium, low potassium, or lacking vitamin D, which is those are the 3 most common ones, I would say. I don't know if you would agree with me.
Or even fiber.
Calcium,
I see low fiber a lot of times.
But having those 3 nutrients in particular be off, they present themselves as hormone problems, immune problems, emotional and mental problems. So people are getting treated for anxiety or paranoia or, oh my God, I have hormone imbalances. When in reality, your vitamin D is too low, for example, and
or you're low acid in your stomach and none of it's getting absorbed, and you're on antidepressants all of a sudden.
Exactly, because it's so. And I see this as a huge problem. When I would have clients come back with blood tests, almost all of them would come back with low vitamin D, and they're like, "Well, I go out in the sun sometimes, and it's a big problem. We're not in the sun that much. Even if you work in the sun, you're still not in the sun that much. So
I take plenty of abuse from the medical community because I think I'm giving medical advice, and I'm not. I'm giving nutrition advice. I'm giving lifestyle advice. If you've got low thyroid and low testosterone, I'm going to ask you to increase your sleep first and foremost. 24-year-old firemen have the lowest testosterone blood tests that I see when they send me there because of their lack of sleep. Some sun exposure, some salt, some fructose for the liver, some iodine for the thyroid. When you start optimizing all of these things, that's why I talk about the vertical diet in terms of hormone optimization. It's not about supplementing hormones. Some people may need to do that. But if you're a trainer, and I say this in my seminars to coaches that I work with, I said, if you're a trainer and someone comes into you and they want to gain muscle and they're hypogonadal, if you take their money, you're ripping them off. You're going to run them through all of these weight training workouts and you're just wasting their time. They're not going to gain muscle if they're hypogonadal. You have to try and address that problem first, and that usually happens with sleep, fatty liver, sun exposure, vitamin D. It's a whole host of other things that come as a priority over lifting weights.
What are the tests that you run for people like that to look at?
Well, I like to get them to get a blood test. I ask most of all of my athletes to get a blood test,
okay.
and there's a whole spectrum. 5 pages, as you know, the HA1C and the D3, vitamin D25 hydroxy, of course, the testosterone, the estrogen. Their cholesterol, prolactin, it's just the list goes on and on.
Okay.
And it's really comprehensive. And if we can identify deficiencies, then we can remedy those, or at least implement at least help them understand that this is going to be your challenge, particularly with women who are hypothyroid. They're not going to lose fat.
How common is it for you not to see a deficiency?
Pretty rare.
Yeah.
Pretty rare, particularly with usually when a client comes to you, I'm not even going to say athlete, a client comes to you, they're already feeling like shit. That's kind of compelled them to come there.
Sure, there's a little bit of self-selection there.
It really is. So I'm getting the ones that already have problems generally and just haven't seen them yet or don't know how to fix them. And with athletes, there's generally some sort of surplus or deficiency because they've put themselves in that position with all the hard work they've done without proper restoration.
How when you're training some of these athletes and some of these performance enhanced athletes with like anabolic steroids, for example, do they start to see that they can use less of these substances when their diet, when they follow what you're doing?
100%.
Okay.
And on that same note, we talked about how a lot of women will restrict calories and they'll stop eating red meat and they'll stop and they'll sleep 4 hours a night and do cardio twice a day. And a lot of these women will get into shape and they might win shows and then pay later because they're compensating for all those deficiencies with drugs, the vast majority of them. And I'm like, look, this is a dead end game. The lack of iron and the lack of B12 and the lack of red meat and the lack of sleep. You're taking thyroid and Anavar and clenbuterol and, so it's a very short-term fix.
Masking a lot of things.
They're masking a lot of the deficiencies.
I would argue right now that there's more of a problem in men's physique and women's bikini than there is even in pro bodybuilding. I think a lot of outsiders look at bodybuilders and think, oh my God, they must be doing so much drugs to look like that. But I see more abuse in the lower levels in the men's physique and the women's bikini of just like you said, just the lack of knowledge, time under iron, and experience has drawn them to disregard some of the staple things like diet, nutrition, sleep that they should be doing, and they're just reaching for the next drug or pill.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be a hypocrite because I used performance-enhancing drugs throughout my career. But I understood what they did to me because I was getting blood tests every single month and I could see how I could manipulate those things. I wouldn't take a lot of anti-estrogens because my diet was created in such a way that I wouldn't have high estrogen. I wasn't eating any vegetable oils, which increases inflammation and estrogen. I was staying away from a lot of foods that would cause me the indigestion. Even something like carrots is a naringenin and helps decrease estrogen. So when you're really careful, and bread, those kinds of things, goitrogens from maybe soy, etc. So I'm real careful about that. But the big thing is the compensation. I understand behind the scenes that you might look a certain way, but that doesn't necessarily mean you feel very good. and you're going to have huge fluctuations in energy level, body composition, water retention, all of those things, and potentially, again, exposure to immune system problems. And I've seen so many women in particular, they tend to crash harder because they restrict more. Men get to eat more food. And so they're able to, and they tend to cheat a little more. They'll have the pizza or the burrito and end up getting more micronutrients as a result, and probably eat more salt and, and eat more red meat. Women are so restrictive and then compensating for that with the performance-enhancing drugs that they end up with these huge micronutrient deficiencies, and that's when the big rebound occurs. So I've said that, and the original question was, can you use less? And the answer is 100% yes. When you're eating right, you need less. And the reason that's important is because the more you use, the more side effects that you incur. And particularly pre-contest for bodybuilding, you don't need very much. In powerlifting or hypertrophy in the off season, maybe a little extra testosterone because you're at a calorie surplus can provide you a benefit. When you're at a calorie deficit, all you need is a little something to prevent muscle tissue loss. And depending on who you are, maybe to increase metabolism, to burn a little more fat. So you can use a lot less. And to be specific, and Flex was the first person, I've worked with about every guru in the business over the years, either directly or indirectly. Chris Aceto, Chad Nichols, Hawny even helped me out one year. Dave Palumbo, I hired him one year to help me. Charles Glass, Oscar, Kai's former trainer. I mean, I've worked with just about everybody in the business. And so I know what all their protocols are. They sent me the entire diet, the entire protocol. I know what all those are. And I can tell you, without being specific, that Flex, when I went to work with him, put me on about half or less. It was 100 milligrams of test prop every other day, 100 milligrams of Masteron every other day, 37.5 milligrams of Tren every other day.
God, that's not much at all.
Wait a minute, that's
especially
it?
for a
That's
guy for a guy your size.
This is when I turned pro. This was the best I ever was.
That's insane because the mentality, at least the belief is that, these guys are taking maybe some of them are taking grams and grams of anabolics every week.
And I would say that if they intended to do that, that would be an off season, because if you're not at a calorie surplus, hypertrophy is a very difficult thing.
Sure.
Okay? So all you're trying to do is hold on to muscle tissue and burn fat. And that can be done very easily at very low doses. You didn't let me finish.
Oh, there's more.
They're like, come on, Stan, that's not all you took.
Like 4,000 milligrams
liar.
of D-ball. Yeah. Here comes the rest of the stack.
50 milligrams of Winstrol a day. 2 IUs of GH 5 days a week. And that was what the prep was for. I tried clenbuterol, but it made my heart race so fast that when I was doing the 20 rep sets, I couldn't keep up with the breathing. I was just gassing out. And so I jumped off of that real quick. I didn't need anyhow. I'm pretty lean. So somebody else may choose to add a thermogenic, which I would have them cycle 2 weeks at a time, a caffeine, a clenbuterol, or whatever, if they needed it. But I'm just saying that turned me pro at 254 pounds on stage in, just the best condition I'd ever been in my life.
Wow.
What do you have to take right now to manage yourself where you're at right now?
I do HRT. I like to take 100 milligrams of test prop 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Wow. It's still not very much at all.
The reason the short ester and the more frequent injections is because it keeps my estrogen down. I found that the longer esters and the larger doses less frequently can elevate the estrogen a little higher. And that's one of the things I want to manage now. And I stay, depending on when I get tested, somewhere between 7 and 1,200.
So you're still within range.
Yeah.
I mean, you're within normal
I
range.
rarely get up to 1,500 if I test like the day after a shot or something like that. But I don't need to now. What I found is it takes half as much to maintain, twice as much to gain. And that's both in terms of the dosage and the amount of work required.
Oh, that's a great quote. You don't need as much to maintain. You need more to...
No, very little. And I almost apologize to people when I tell them what little I have to do now to stay 240 pounds pretty lean.
But to get there, it was much harder.
To get there. And if like somebody says, well, you could still compete. And I'm like, no, it would take me a year and a half, at least a year to put on 12 pounds of solid muscle and get leaner and try and get back to, the mid 240s or so hard.
Has the trends with performance enhancing drug usage changed from the early 90s to today? Are people just using more? Are they getting smarter with it now?
There were some folks that used a lot more for a while there. We know in the late 90s we had the big guts and the insulin was thrown in there
crazy,
huge.
didn't it?
And just as a side note, when I was at the seminar with John, Milos Sarkev was there. And Milos is famous for his insulin protocols. And I think a lot of people abused that and was using R and too much of it and with every meal. But Milos has done something that I think is pretty important, and one of the things I promote today. And John Meadows talks about it as well, and that's your intra-workout hydration. And that's, again, your dextrin, your glucose fructose blend, or dextrose maltodextrin blend or whatever with sodium, and they like to throw in EAAs. When you are working out and all that blood is pumping and forcing into the muscles, if you can give it this little IV of glucose and sodium and maybe essential amino acids all throughout the workout, just sipping on it from 15 minutes before you arrive all the way through the entire workout, you can have a dramatically improved workout. You can have less delayed onset muscle soreness as a result. I think that's one of the biggest things that people could do now in hypertrophy sessions, particularly if you're going to train 2-a-days. All my MMA athletes, CrossFitters,
yeah, for sure,
strongmen, I have a post-workout drink I have them drink, but I think now in my version 3.0 for the vertical diet, I'm going to be having them sip it all throughout the workout, because from personal experience and all the stuff and visiting with Milos and talking to John, I usually I'd have a little something before and then after. And now I'm having them hydrate all throughout the workout while they're doing the hypertrophy training. And that, again, we talked about the fact that without the need for the insulin key, your muscles will soak up that glycogen while you're training and utilize that. And you don't get as sore and you recover faster. And I know everybody focuses on soreness, thinking that's the primary driver of recovery is pain. And I guess, now we found out that, frequency and volume is much more important.
Absolutely.
And so if you're not sore the next day, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That might mean that your sleep is good, your hydration's good, your glycogen intake was good, and your muscles were given everything that they needed.
Right.
And they're healing faster.
You're touching on something that we actually typically don't advocate for, just because I think it's rare that we have somebody that is at that level where I would consider that a bigger rock. Now,
yeah, we have to talk to people about sleeping, eating properly, training.
And then they walk out of here and all they hear is, I got to drink a Gatorade
exactly.
after my workout.
Right, and that's
you have to earn
jump
it.
on
There's
that,
no question. And again, I talk about athletes training 2-a-days.
Yeah.
You can get
That's
adequate carbohydrate
a different
restoration
subject,
following a 1-a-day training session by eating your meal after training.
right.
You don't need all that glucose right away, but for really hard training, competing athlete, 2 hypertrophy
And
sessions,
somebody who's got all the big rocks in line.
all the big rocks,
Right.
That's such a huge thing. What you just said right there, the big things. I talk about eat, sleep, and train, and then the 99%, and then the 1% is the supplements or the what I call the what do I call them? The rehab therapies. People want to go jump in get a massage or jump in a cryotherapy, or stuff like that, and think that that's a significant, piece of the puzzle while they're missing sleep or they're
or not squatting or doing a big movement.
Right. They focus on the stuff. And I said in my rant once that things that are done to you or for you are rarely as effective as things you do for yourself.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to get them, like you said, to focus on the big rocks.
Yeah, and that's why I had to say that, because I know they would jump all over me later on for not saying something to you, because we kind of tease. There's this, these guys now, and I feel like since Men's Physique, I feel like I see it more of, walking around with their weight belts on, they got their intra shakes going on, and then they're doing all these like machine exercises for an hour, and
one arm cable push down,
sideways chest press.
Yeah, with the selfie thing, they're filming themselves doing a
and so I'm like, you could probably save yourself $100 a month and stop drinking that, and maybe just add some real exercises and movements in there.
Yeah, by the same token, I've just said, frequency and volume is the most important. I did a video where a rant where I talked about the reason why Westside Barbell athletes are so strong. And I said in there that they're savages. They train like savages, amongst savages, with great coaches. And they take their body somewhere it hasn't been before. At some point, the frequency and volume has to be done in such a way that there's a progression. Otherwise, you stop adapting. Or you're going to have to considerably change the loading mechanism somewhere along the line. Like we said, copy and pasting a diet. You're going to have to make adjustments to it over time. And same thing with the training. the one-arm cable pushdowns, regardless of how many T's you cross and I's you dot, and you know, whether or not it's done within 15 minutes of taking in this pill or that powder or this supplement, that's probably not going to get you to the really top.
Right.
That's a very good point to make, because I used to get confused in that as a kid, interested in trying to build my body, and I was more, because that's what you're advertised, right? So I thought, okay, taking supplements is the most important thing, and you know, being sore is the most important thing.
Right.
You know, I didn't realize that was, you know, take a protein shake was the most important thing. I had no idea that it was eat more real food, train consistently, focus on these big lifts because you're a young kid and you need to build all this muscle, get good sleep. Like, I didn't know that. I'm like, oh, cool, I'm going to buy the, you know, branched chain amino acids and take that 5 times a day because that's going to spike muscle protein synthesis.
That's why I say shakes are for fakes, eat steaks. And the supplement industry gets so pissed at me about all that. And I'm like, look, there may be a time and place for that stuff, but the big rocks, like you said.
Absolutely.
Right. Which most people are missing. I want to take you in a little bit of a different direction. You are a successful entrepreneur. We've got the water ball going. We got the vertical diet. I hear you talking about coaching. What, you're doing a ton of fucking things. Tell me about that. And you also strike me as a very growth-minded person. So I would love to hear, you know, through all these ventures, what are you learning about yourself and what are you learning about business?
You know, I'm learning that I love this business. I was never able to monetize this business throughout my career. I had to keep my day job, and bodybuilding I had to set competing on the shelf for 10 years while I built my businesses. I didn't start a company until I was 35 years old. But I built 4 very successful businesses over the last 10 years. But all of them, one of them was telecommunications, one was an engineering firm that I ran, and one of them was real estate, bought, built, and sold multifamily, single family, and commercial properties. And one of them currently that I'm still working with is medical and recreational marijuana clinics up in Washington with a partner of mine.
Well, we like you more now.
Yeah.
I would have offered a joint, dude. I can't believe it.
You know, the craziest things, I've never smoked one.
Get out of here.
But when I was a kid, I was 12 years old. This is crazy though. When I was 12 years old, I worked at 7-Eleven. And I recognized at that time, beer and cigarettes, the 2 biggest sellers. I was always stocking the shelves, beer and cigarettes, the drugs sold, and coffee. And so when marijuana came along, much later in life, when I had the opportunity to invest, I was like, oh yeah, drugs is good business. And so I jumped in, you know, and it's been a good business for us. But none of those things are really my passion. Never were. I was making a living. I chased dollars, money. My passion is the health and fitness industry. The cooler's a neat, you know, adjunct. It was a way for me to kind of keep my foot in the door with this business and sell to people in the industry. But the nutrition program, my coaching other people, I've accepted the fact that I'm 50 now. It took me a while to accept that. And I can't compete. I can't do the things I used to do, but I can help others from the lessons that I learned, you know, from my experience and my advice. And so I've really enjoyed that. I get really involved in it. I like my kids, you know, Hawthorne Shaw, and I talk to them all the time. And all the athletes that I work with. You know, I work with Tyler Beatty, the San Francisco Giants pitcher. I work with Olympic silver medalist in shot put and discus. I work with athletes from, you know, all different sports and a lot of ordinary folks, moms, soccer moms, and dad bods. And we've done a lot of great things on my site. I've shown that how many people or testimonials, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, that I've gotten from all over the world. I've had over 50,000 downloads now on my diet all over the world. Wow. And I get testimonials every single day. I can't even post them all because people complain that my site, I'm just pimping out my site for selling my diet. But I'm excited I get these, and people who are, decreasing their blood pressure and improving their digestive health and improving their blood sugars, you know, diabetics, type 1 and type 2, able to take less medication or come off of medication as a result. People who have been on antacids for years, and all the different success stories, losing weight. So I'm passionate about that. That drives me. And so here's what I've done. Obviously, I released the vertical diet about 5 months ago on the internet as a product that you can purchase. The vertical diet and peak performance has everything that you need. Everything I gave Hawthorne, everything I gave Shaw, Larry Wheels, Dan Green, all of these great athletes, I provide to everyone now for a fee. It's $100 for a download for this, everything I think I've learned over the last 30 years. And it's really easy to follow. Like I said, I list all the foods, exactly what to eat, sample macros, sample diet plans, and I include sleep protocol, hydration stuff, training programs for hypertrophy, the ones from Flex, and the strength program I got from Eddie Cohn and all the years I've trained with him. So it's all in there, and it's easy to follow. But I'm just one guy selling one diet plan. And so now what I've started to do is I've created, I recently discussed doing a book deal with, not just discussed it, but we're moving forward on it, with Victory Belt, who did the Paleo Solution. They also did, who's this book? Supple Leopard.
Oh, right.
So a really good group that we're working with. We're going to release the vertical diet.
Kelly Starrett and Rob Wolf.
Yes, and they're going to work with me, and we're coordinating that now, and we're putting everything together. It'll take us 6 months to get to market, but we've already started down that road. But the big picture for me is the vertical meals. Obviously, I just started the meal prep company just 2.5-3 months ago. We started doing vertical meals. I partnered with a big company who serves 4 million meals a year. They've been in business for 20 years, and they have extraordinary kitchen facilities. They've got millions of dollars invested in German engineered equipment. So we've got moisture control ovens. We've got this giant modified atmospheric pressure system for sealing all of the food and taking the oxygen out. We've got flash freezing units that freeze it really fast. So when it arrives to you and you cook it in your microwave, it actually tastes fresh and delicious. We sourced all the grass-fed beef, the line-caught salmon. I cook everything in beef tallow that we render and bone broth that we boil. That they do right there on their site. So I know there's no vegetable oils in any of it. We cook everything with no vegetable oils. So the food tastes amazing. It's healthy. And so the vertical meals is something I just released. And it's all 48 states. We've done over 50,000 meals in less than 3 months already.
Wow.
Yeah, the taste is extraordinary.
Of the three businesses, the cooler, the vertical diet, and the meals, what has the most challenges for you right now?
Well, there's one more in that.
Oh, shit.
And this is, we've got the book. It's the vertical coaching. What I want to do is I have an app under development that I mentioned, and I've already started doing coaching seminars. And my goal is to get an army of people that can implement the vertical diet with their clients. Using the app, they can set themselves up on the app as a coach, and then have their clients set themselves up as a client and select their coach, and the coach can see all of their clients. Remember, I said they could see all their daily meals, and they would have their checklist, and we could track their sleep and look at their heart rate. And so coaches can see their clients, and I, of course, as an admin, can see every coach and every client and look at the success rates and see the clients that are the coaches that are most successful in helping clients lose weight. And basically, behind the scenes, between myself and I partnered with Damon McClure, who's a PhD candidate, registered dietitian, master's in exercise phys. He was former director of the nutrition department at UNLV. We're co-authoring the book together, and he's gone through this with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that the academia appreciates the quality of the work that we're doing. But we're now, as a team, behind all of these coaches and all of their athletes, or all of their clients, not just athletes. And that's my big push now, is to get the program utilized by as many coaches and replicate myself. Not just in the U.S., but in other countries. We already had visitors from Canada and the U.K. that have become coaches. And that, to me, is the big picture. That's the giant. And, of course, they can sell the meals and get commissions on meals that they sell to their clients. What I found in the research is the meta-analysis that's been done on success rate for clients. When you study the most likely outcomes, we talked about sustainability. Simple, sensible, sustainable, a healthy diet that can be maintained long term. What we found is that clinicians are the worst in terms of success rates when you go to a registered dietitian or a doctor on a weekly basis and check up. After that is apps. That's the second worst. If you have an app and you're tracking your progress on your app, those don't seem to have very good long-term success rates. Beyond that is one of the better results is meals. When you get meals, pre-prepared meals, as we know, we always want our people to meal prep. When my wife meal preps and I see plastic containers in the fridge, I know that her progress is going to improve because she's not left to, her own druthers. And when we can get people to meal prep, whether it's buying my prepared meals or making their own, that seems to be one of the most the best predictors of success long term. Right. And that's why Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig does better than registered dietitians and clinicians, because you just eat what they tell you to eat. And we know that calories reign supreme. There's a calorie equation first and foremost. Now, beyond that is when you start coupling things together. When you have a meal prep and a weekly check-in with a coach and an app, that is the most successful program long-term for people. And so that's what we're trying to create with this program for our athletes is success rates, sustainability long-term, so people actually realize success.
So from a standpoint of like finances for you, which one is the most financially successful currently right now at this moment, and which one is proposing the most challenges?
The app's proposing the most challenges is the most expensive, and it just keeps growing. And I knew that historically when I created computer programs to run, or had programmers create, business programs to run my business. They're like, you're married to them, and they're on staff forever. And I know that's going to be the case here. My programmers, when they finish the app, we're going to constantly fiddle with this thing, and so. The hardest part is obviously the computer stuff. Obviously the app, because it's intellectual property, there's no cost of goods, or not the app, but the vertical diet itself is something that I've created, already. Anytime you're selling ebooks or information or videos or stuff like that, your cost of goods is next to nil. That's been very, very successful. Between as long as we're talking about business, we'll just throw it out there. Between the vertical diet, which I just launched 5 months ago, and the vertical meals, which I just launched 3 months ago, we've grossed over $1 million already.
Wow.
So those have been very successful. And I think the meal prep long-term, because it's a perpetuity, because it's a recurring buy, like the cooler, if you buy a cooler, you might want another one in 2 or 3 years, maybe. It's a one-time thing. It's a widget. It's a T-shirt. It's a, whatever. But when you're buying things, it's like when I was in the rental business, I really liked the rental business because I was getting rent every single month. I call it making money while you sleep. Right. And if I can get recurring revenue from people, that's another thing with the app. Eventually, I'd like to sign people up with I mentioned that one of the most successful things was meals, and secondarily, it was weekly check-ins. Well, in order to do a weekly check-in, you want to become a member. And you want to pay whatever, fee, like $30 a month, so that every week you can check in with a coach and have, know that you have a team behind you looking after your progress. So membership's obviously another very effective way to make money that you don't have to touch every client. Touching every client, trading time for money, as we know, there's a limit. You can go, 50, 75, maybe if you're a hot shot, $100 an hour for doing personal training a client. And then sometimes maybe you can bring 2 clients in at once. Oh, yeah. But when you're doing things that have recurring revenue and creating a customer base and selling information with no cost of goods, that's obviously the most profitable. Now, I spend at least 4 hours a day answering emails and DMs from clients and just people who have purchased the diet who I don't really necessarily have an ongoing relationship with, but I feel committed to them to help them implement it.
What do you think about that? Because you're a guy who's been doing business for a long time, and so you've seen the evolution and this transition into this social media world that we live in right now. Yeah. What do you think about that? How are you dealing with that right now?
Well, I think it's great because I don't have to pay all the marketing fees that used to be associated with getting your name out there. I don't have to buy magazine advertising or radio or what have you. And even like the program that you folks are doing, one of the reasons that I was have realized so much success is because I've been able to sit down with folks like you or Mark Bell or some others in the industry and talk to thousands of people at once. Even my rants, 20, 30, 50,000 people will watch a rant. If I go to an expo and stand at a booth, I might talk to a few hundred. Right. And so the social media, YouTube, Instagram, et cetera, and this is one of the things I promote with my coaches is building their social media base by providing information.
How are you finding your coaches?
Social media. I advertise my seminar. I tell them that this is where I'm going to be and here's what I'm going to provide you. I'm not trying to train the next generation of scientists. They're out there already. I can refer to the work of the knowledgeable people that I just mentioned. I do I have over 100 references. It's my vertical diet is 50 pages. I have over 100 references to videos and articles and research studies, and I name some of the resources that I got this information from. The Dr. Sandra Godek, and on sleep, Dr. Stasha Gomanak, and I mentioned Lane Norton in there, of course, a lot of his work. I've watched hundreds of hours of his videos over the years. Greg Nuckols and his work over at Stronger by Science. So there's all of these people who I've learned these things from. I reference their work in there and tell them this is where I got the information from. The Brad Schoenfelds of the world, the Brett Contrerases of the world, the people who have really put forth a lot of good science. And then, as we discussed, the wisdom that comes from people like Flex and Eddie Cohn and Mark Bell and those guys, the bro science people that the academia may look down their noses at, but these guys have made huge contributions to my success and many others. So that's I think the bulk of what I try and do is give people information. When I went up to Iceland, I did a seminar, and they videotaped it and they put it out on the internet. And my wife was concerned. She's like, Stan, they just put your entire seminar on the internet, 2.5 hours for free. And you went through the entire diet, step by step. Nobody's going to need to buy the diet. I sold 5,000 or 6,000 of them in the first 3 months.
That's right.
Because people watched it.
Formula.
And, they wanted to know more about it. And I'm the same way. If I watch an hour video and there's a lot of information, I'm pissed because I have to watch it again with a notepad and a pen to write everything down, so that I actually can retain it and implement it if it's that kind of information.
Well, this is how we worked our way into the space, as we saw, when social media first came on, and then the web and this ability to make money virtually, it became very popular to have these paid walls that if I must just prove a little bit that you're smart, but if you want to know all my information, it's $9 a month or whatever.
Give you a teaser, but you have to get more by paying this for the membership and all that. And that seems to be the formula that's existed.
So we came out with a total different mentality, which was we're going to give all of our information for free and share everything that we know and our experiences. And as a byproduct, I think people purchase a lot of the programs and things we sell almost as like a thank you. It's like, listen, and then we used to get that. I remember when we first started monetizing the business, and we released the first program, and people were like, you've already taught us how to program ourselves. I'm not even going to open it. I don't need to, but I want to support you and so on. So I think when you have that attitude of
plus you're good luck trying to fight what's going to happen anyway.
Right.
I mean, everything that can be free will be free anyway with the information age.
It's all accessible now.
Yeah, so in giving people more information, it's more valuable than in the past. We thought we couldn't. We got to hide it. We got to keep it a secret.
Yeah,
it doesn't work that way.
Well, here's what's interesting is that I won't have a paywall to give information. I'll have a paywall to check in with me weekly to hold you accountable.
Right. That's totally different.
Well, that's your time. That's your personal time.
Yeah, it's personal time. And if they have a question or something like that, or just for me to shake them up, the app is intended to have some artificial intelligence ongoing to where it can start to learn. If somebody doesn't do their morning weigh-in or if they miss a 10-minute walk, it can at least give them a reminder. Hey, you got to get on that. And I haven't seen your body weight. You didn't check in with me. I need a photo. I only got 2 pictures of food today. I need. So it just kind of reminds them to stay on track. When I did my hip rehab, I went to Mark Philippi there in Las Vegas. Now, I know how to do plie squats, but the likelihood that I'm going to do those with a little kettlebell is pretty slim. So I hired Mark. I paid him, and I went down to his facility, and I worked with him 2 hours a week, twice a week, to rehab my hip for me. And I posted the entire video on YouTube of my exact rehab for my hip, which now I forward to people. People ask me questions. I always copy and paste articles or videos or something. I give them a little quick 1-sentence answer, and then I send him the information that I, feel is like one of the better articles I read or videos that kind of supports what my contention is. Part of that is because I want them to have the information. Most of that is because if you think it works, it works. Most of that is because people get information from 6 different sources and they want to, I want them to implement mine. So I need them to have the confidence that what I'm recommending is supported by, someone reputable in the industry or some sort of, peer-reviewed published research article. Because a lot of the placebo effect can take effect if I can just get them to buy into it and do it consistently rather than having all these other influences telling them, oh, that's not going to work. And I'm like, well, yeah, it is because Stan said so, and here's the research in addition to that.
Yeah. I love seeing your again, it's refreshing because you're very honest, very open, you share everything. And you understand the connection. You just mentioned the placebo effect. That's a very important aspect of improving your health or your fitness or whatever, is understanding and believing in what you're doing. And a lot of people don't talk about that. So.
No, and I'll send a questionnaire, a pretty lengthy questionnaire to a client. And when they give me the feedback, there's a lot of things in there. I'm like, oh, that's a waste of money. That's a waste of money. If it's not hurting them and they believe it works, I'll leave that alone. I'll focus on the big rocks. And I won't, kick them in the teeth about their BCAAs, because it's probably not causing them any problem. It's not hurting them, unless it's a financial decision. I can make those adjustments, and oftentimes.
Well, I used to say one of the things that were, because I was doing some supplements, and one of the things that I noticed about myself is that when I was consistently having to take something, it made me consistent about other shit, and
100%.
And I justified it as, well, fuck, it's $100-something I spend a month or whatever on this shit. But because I know that I'm having to time it, take it, and everything like that, it's making everything else in my life more consistent.
And I said that in my rant on the West Side Barbell people. I was like, a plan is better than no plan. And what I've found from a practical experience is that when I get a client who tells me that, most of this is good, and I just need a little help with this. So I send them the questionnaire and I have them answer everything. I just need a little diet help. My training's fine. This is fine. And then I get that questionnaire back, and it's a hot fucking mess. I'm like, dude, you're not doing anything, And generally, what you find is they don't have a plan.
Yeah.
And so when you implement that plan, and oftentimes, I get to work with somebody like, they'll ask me like, how do you help a Brian Shaw? He's 4-time world's strongest man. And I wonder myself sometimes, and I get in there and I'm like, God, what can I do for this guy? When he reached out to me, I'm like, I can't help Brian Shaw. He's 4-time world's strongest man. He knows more than I do. And then you get in, you dig around behind the scenes, and I talk to his wife, and I get a blood test, and I get a questionnaire, and I'm like, dude, you don't have a CPAP. Your vitamin D is at 25. You got diarrhea every day. And he's the first to acknowledge, and we talked about it on his podcast, that regularity is something that you just you don't consider to be all that important.
It's crazy, actually, how many people don't even think about their shits.
No.
Yeah. That it's like, normal to shit yourself.
Yeah. Yes.
So, people just that's like a sign. Like, that's your body trying to tell you something.
And can't map it back to a source.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm so quote unquote restrictive, specific about the foods that I select initially. And then I ask them, how do you feel? How's your strength? How's your energy? How are your shits? Because I want to know if these foods are the right foods for them. And I have to make minor adjustments for different people. Some people can't handle oranges. The acidity in their stomach doesn't agree with them. Some people can't do any dairy at all. And I got to get their calcium from a powdered eggshell or something.
Right.
So there are adjustments that can and will be made, but it's just always interesting. Like you said, most people don't have a plan.
Right.
And when they have a plan, all of a sudden everything comes together. And like, oh my God, this diet's amazing. I'm like, no, dude, what you were doing was horrible.
Right.
Any diet would have worked for you because you were a hot mess.
Oh, that's such a great point. We talk about this with I used to get clients who would switch over to vegan out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, oh my God, it's everything. It's the diet. I'm like, well, maybe it's because you weren't eating any fucking vegetables before.
Right.
And you finally gave your body some of these things that it needed.
I said that in my obesity rant. I said that all diets work when they're strictly adhered to. The problem is that people generally fall off. And that's when you start nitpicking about micronutrient density, gut health, immune system, and sustainability. Those are the things that start to come into effect. How do I keep people on this long term? And the same with the exercise program. 3 10-minute walks is sustainable. Getting to the gym and doing 40 minutes on a treadmill is monotonous. And I mean,
nobody likes that.
Nobody's going to do that consistently.
This
They got
is why
kids and work and all that other stuff.
It's a time suck.
The 10-minute walks they're just life-changing.
This is why I coach the steps. I use steps as I get my clients to track where they're at step-wise, and then I incrementally increase it. Because when you take someone who, on average, takes 4,000 to 6,000 steps, and you take them to 7,000 steps, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
It's so easy, especially when they can break it up in short 10-minute little walks versus having to drive to the gym and get on a Stairmaster for an hour
Doesn't
or whatever.
make any sense.
So, Stan, when you're not eating pounds of meat, carrying coolers around, running businesses, coaching, what are you doing? What
my kids.
What tickles your tummy?
24/7.
Okay.
I got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Good for you.
I talk about it on all the podcasts. It's all slobber about kids, but I started late in life with kids. I'm 50 now. I got a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. So, and fortunately, I was retired from bodybuilding and powerlifting, and I'm in a good position, with business. So. I have a lot of patience.
Talk about the decision to do. Okay, I'm 37. I don't have kids.
Yeah,
and I've been with the same woman for 8 years. We're not even married yet, but we've been together for 8 years, and I haven't had kids. Everyone gives me shit all the time. Talk about why you waited and some of the things that you're maybe happy about, or maybe is there any regrets of not having them earlier?
I don't know that I have any regrets. Certainly, it would have been great to have them earlier, but they're fantastic. I guess the big thing for me is that I was so selfish all those years, so focused in the bodybuilding and powerlifting and work. I was running my businesses and I didn't have time for anything else. And I was just so directly focused on that. Plus the risk tolerance. If I had my kids 10 years ago, there's probably a lot of things I wouldn't have tried because I'm a lot more risk averse now. I won't double down on things. I won't mortgage my home, which I've done in the past against investments and stuff. So I'm a lot more cautious now, but I'm also a lot more patient now. My kids will do things that would probably freak most people out. And I'm like, oh, that's cute. But probably everybody feels about their kids. But
you start to view like adults, like you can kind of see the kid in adults now. I noticed that as I had kids, I could just see like the same sort of behaviors and things in adults.
Oh, yeah. My son's a pain in the ass. He's just like me when I was a kid. I just shake my head. I'm like, man. Because my dad if I would act like my kid, he would wallop me. I let him get away with a lot, though. That's for sure.
How much of that has provided personal growth for yourself of seeing yourself in them?
Oh, a lot of it. It just, and again, makes me really, really patient. Cured me of my OCD. All those years I talked about, those repetitive behaviors and the OCD and the T-shirts lined up by color and all that stuff. Then you get kids and they're drawing on your furniture.
You have to get over that shit real quick.
Yeah, and your inside of your car is just one spill after another of food, and it's just torn apart. Every time you turn around, there's something ruined in your house or your car, or it doesn't matter what it is. Nothing in the house is
ever the same.
Yeah.
Now, being a guy that was, for sure in love with his work and bodybuilding and powerlifting, were you kind of an asshole to date and be with back then?
I don't think so. I've always
you said selfish.
I've always been focused on my goals, but real generous. I've always been very helpful, and I am now as a coach, and always have been as a boyfriend and husband. That what my wife's goals become my goals too. I want to help her achieve things, and so I'm really, really helpful that way. People, I think, when they meet me, are kind of surprised that I don't have this air of arrogance about me, and I don't think anything's beneath me. And I'm still the Fuller brush salesman that I started out. And I took the cooler and I went to the Olympia, and I didn't have a booth, and I walked from booth to booth to booth, talking to the people at Allmax and Animal and Muscle Farm, and I just walked up and said, "Who's in charge?" And I pitched them the cooler. Just the power of broke, as Damon John calls it.
Did you have an example of this growing up, or that made you be this guy who
would
would
just always work? I started at 7-Eleven when I was 12 years old, and I was slinging pizzas when I was 14, and I was working construction through college, and I was a maintenance man after I graduated. Worked my way up to management, and eventually started my own companies. But I've always just grinded. I'm a blue collar guy at heart, and I'm the same way. With bodybuilding, powerlifting as in business. And even now with all the success I've realized, having lived the life I've lived and done the things I've done, I'm still out beating the streets and hustling, and trying to provide a good product and service for people. There's no advantage in taking advantage of anyone. And so I'm trying to give more than I get, even with my new program, putting people in for commissions with the meals or as part of my coaching staff. Now with the vertical diet, I gave them up a 75-25 split, and 75's in their pocket, 25's in mine. I just believe in the power of getting 1% of 100 men's labor instead of 1% of 100% of one man's labor. Mm-hmm. And that's in order to do that, I need to have people that believe in me, lead by example, and that's kind of what I'm developing now. I think anybody who's worked with me over the years knows that I give a lot. In terms of information, like you said, and I care about their outcome, about their results.
That's what people say about you.
Yeah.
That's 100% what people, if I bring up your name to people who know you, that's what they say about you. So I think you're doing a good job.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What do you think what are some of the things that you have got from being a blue collar worker and growing up that way that have now attributed to your success and having multi-million-dollar businesses now?
I just realize it's still work at the end of the day. Every day I wake up, I got my checklist. Just like I got a checklist, and I just did a seminar 2 days ago in Vegas at the Olympia for the coaches, and I created checklists for them. You're going to have to hand out 10 business cards a day. You're going to have to do one free seminar a week. just soliciting people to come and learn about nutrition and change their life, and during which you're going to ask for the sale, and it's going to be a win-win. You're going to give them something that they need that will help them, and they're going to pay for it, because anything you give for free has no perceived value, and they're not going to think it's worth anything, and they're not going to have any skin in the game, and they won't commit to it. And so these are the same messages that I teach my coaches, that I keep every single day trying to employ for myself, is these little checklists. If you ask me to do something for you and I don't pull out my phone and put it in my daily reminder calendar, it will never happen. So I live off of lists, and of course I've got action items and I prioritize things, but that's huge for me. The list, the action items, the daily checklist. That's in my app for my clients and my coaches, is a daily checklist of the things that I want them to do every day. The 10-minute walks, what time they get to bed, what time they wake up, the meals that they eat, whether they take vitamin D3. All those things are in the daily checklist. If you do these things every day, the dingers, the singles, then focusing on the goal will never be a long-term success strategy. Focusing on the process of getting there, the habits, the lifestyle, and starting to engage and enjoy those things. I enjoy my 10-minute walks. I put my daughter's breakfast on the table. I take a 10-minute walk and come back. I take her to school. At night before bed, I enjoy that 10-minute walk, how it clears my mind, how it helps me sleep when I get home. Just, it doesn't matter what the circumstance is. I do those things every single day.
Are there things that you do as far as getting away and disconnecting and maybe breaking the checklist cycle? And I always say on the show, I say that your greatest strength is normally your greatest weakness also. And so if being organized and checklist guy is your strength, I would also think that might be your Achilles heel, that you have a hard time maybe breaking away from that. Is that true? Or
yeah, one of the videos I did was called Stress for Success, where I talked about how I didn't break away and I was overly invested into one outcome, and I was sacrificing sleep, and I was sacrificing nutrition, I was sacrificing exercise, and how that affected me, and how I experienced anxiety and stress and some mild depression as a result during those times, and how my performance started to decline at work. My business was suffering as well. And when I reincorporated just those fundamental principles of getting better sleep, paying myself first, I called it, getting better sleep, exercising regularly, going back to the gym, stop eating at McDonald's, and I was actually starting to eat healthier food again. I was eating dollar meals at McDonald's for damn near a year when I was running my business, working 18 plus hours.
How old are you right here when you're talking about this?
Oh, 35, 36, 37, right in there. And I did it previously, 5 years previous, for someone else. When I was vice president of a telecommunications company, I was getting 4 hours of sleep a night and pouring, tons and tons of hours into work to try and help build their business. So I learned my lessons by repeating the same mistakes. It takes me a while. I'm a slow learner. But now I know, and it's in the training as well. Like with Eddie Cohn's program, he always deloads about every 3 or 4 weeks. He deloads so you don't overstress your body and build up too much fatigue, and that helps you long term. And so I implement that into my daily life too with the deloads. And like you say, sometimes you have to disconnect. You have to turn the phone off. And it's easy for me at any given moment, all the way over here on the plane, whenever my kids are playing at the park or whatever, or at gymnastics, I'm on the phone answering DMs, responding to clients and customers, and emails, et cetera, all day long, looking at people's blood work and, just sending them articles, you name it, answering questions. And after a while, you realize, oh, man, I haven't come up to take a breath of air in a while. I've been glued to this thing. And so I do have to shut the phone off. One of the big things I did, and I talked about it, I think in the Stress for Success video, is that I have to turn off the news. One of the most depressing things is watching Fox News and MSNBC and all those guys just lobbing bombs at each other. And you hate not being informed, but you also hate being misinformed at the same time. And, it's the same reason I don't watch Basketball Wives, that I don't watch the news, because it's the same stuff.
drama.
Just added, it's just drama.
Nonsense.
Yeah. So, because I always feel really shitty afterwards. I feel like, everything sucks and the world sucks. And, but then when you look around and you start talking to people, you realize, hey, these people are doing pretty good.
There's a great website for that called humanprogress.org. And it talks about all the advancements we've made in the last 20 or 30 years. Like, a lot of people don't know, in the last 30 years, we've reduced worldwide poverty tremendously in the world. There's stuff like that, and it's good to go on there every once in a while to remind yourself, okay, the world's not ending.
There's good things happening.
Positivity.
You got to share with me a story about a success that you've had in one of your businesses that you're most proud of. And I don't want some bullshit like because you saved someone's life or helped somebody. Like I want a selfish one. I want something that made you feel really proud because someone who's put as much work, consistency as you have into everything that you've done. I know there's had to been moments of fuck yes, I put the hard work in.
You know, at one point when I started my telephone company, I had sold my home. I think I had maybe 40 grand from selling my house. I racked up I cashed out my 401k, which is probably only like 5 or 6 grand. I racked up $125,000 worth of credit cards. I had about 10 or 12 credit cards, and I was using them to start my business.
And how old are you?
35 at this time, 34, 35. And I was buying telephone service from Quest at the time, Quest Communications, and reselling it to end users. So I was a telecommunications reseller. They call it a CLEC, competitive local exchange carrier. And I owed them about $250,000. And they used to call me, about every other day asking me for payments. And I'd tell them I just put it in the mail. Lying through my teeth because I didn't have any money. And the credit card companies were calling me. And I borrowed money from my dad. And my dad was a government worker, didn't have a lot of money. When his pops passed away, he got $100,000 from his dad. And he bought a home in Florida, a real modest place. It was probably $110,000. My dad had no money when he retired, none. My mom had spent it all. And so that's all they had was that house in Florida. It was for about 110, 120 grand. And he was able to mortgage it for about 75%, something like $60,000 or $70,000.
God, the burden that must have felt like to carry that.
Hello.
Yeah.
That was overwhelming. That was the time at which I was really specifically talking about in my Stress for Success. I could give a shit about the credit card companies. I talked about this on Dave Palumbo's podcast recently, that those guys are investors. They get a profit from, lending me money, and they get an interest, and that they're investors. So that's at-risk capital. And if I can't pay it back, then hey, we're all in business. Right. So I didn't really worry about that. A lot of people stress about credit cards, and I'm like, why? Right. I've even had people ask me for my help to pay off their credit cards, and I'm like, because the credit card company is more important to you than me? I thought we were friends.
Great point.
Yeah. So I can't understand the mentality. I know it's stressful, sure, but why? Anyhow. So he sent me that money, and I used it to pay down, to maintain some of the monthly payments on the credit cards and to give Quest enough so they wouldn't shut my lines off, because we were anticipating that we would start generating enough revenue to be able to pay our bills. Me and a business partner and the phone company, I started out of an apartment. And I had no furniture in the apartment. I had a couple of fold-out tables, and we had some staff come over and answer phones during the day. And we couldn't afford headsets and stuff, so they were just picking up those little $9 phones and holding them to their ear like this all day long. We were knocking on doors and with letters of authorization, trying to sign people up for phone service. That's the Fuller brush sales reference I made earlier. Just knocking on doors, the same way I knocked on doors at the Olympia last week. It hasn't changed. And so I was hugely in debt, and my father loaned me that money. 75% of his home is everything he had. He's on a modest pension with the government. It's like $4,000 a month, just to give you a feeling that he's not a wealthy guy, never was. And the anxiety and the stress. I missed more sleep. I never knew what anxiety was. My mother suffered with it all her life. She's been in and out of mental institutions and on medication, and was a chronic alcoholic when I was growing up, and always suffering from these manic depressive disorders and anxiety attacks and what have you. And I never understood it. I always thought, this is crazy. What's going on? Then I experienced it one time, and I'm a whole different person as a result. When somebody tells me they have anxiety, I'm not like, get over it.
A lot more empathy.
Oh my God. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you feel that, just the way that lights up your whole body. And that was because of the monies that I owed my dad, and I didn't think I was going to be able to pay back. We thought we were going to go out of business. I don't know what this has to do with your original question, but it was going to get there. With the proudest moment.
Right.
And that was the proudest moment, is when we were able to turn the corner. I was able to start to pay some of those bills, and I was able to give my father back the monies that he gave me. And then I was able to pay off his home. And then I was able to buy him a brand new car. He'd never his whole life bought a brand new car. We had a used Pinto. We had a used station wagon. and I bought him a brand new car, and he wanted, he didn't need the sunroof or all the different bells and whistles, but of course I got him the top of the line. I had him.
See, that just gave me goosebumps. That's what I'm talking about.
That was the proudest moment.
Right.
And I've made a lot of money, spent a lot of money, done a lot of things, but that's the one that sticks out in my mind. And he lives with me today. He's 89 years old.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, he's mostly blind, but is still in good health. He's on no medication. The doctors had him on a few different meds, statins, and a couple of others 5 years ago. But since he's been living with me, I've changed his diet, and he does his 10-minute walks, and he's on no meds.
That's
great.
That's excellent.
How's your relationship with your mom?
That's still tough. I bought them a home and moved them out here, and so she's a few miles from me, and she's some very severe mental challenges in and out of mental institutions. And so it's really, really difficult. She's not all there. It's challenging. There's no question.
How did that affect you? I had a very dysfunctional childhood growing up, and it's taken me years and years to work through and unpack a lot of the stuff and how it's formed and shaped my personality. What are some of the things that you notice in yourself as a grown man now that maybe your relationship with her when you were younger has affected you?
Yeah, she was what we call a functional addict. And so my relationship with her growing up was extraordinary. It was excellent. She was the den leader. She was the house mom. Everybody wanted to come to our place and hang out. She was the Cub Scout leader. When I got a job, she got a job there. When I was working at 7-Eleven, she applied for a job there. We worked there together.
Oh, wow.
She became manager, and I would do the books at night for her. And, she's always helped me. When I got a job managing an apartment community, I brought her in to help leasing for me. And so we worked together through most of those years, but as her conditions, and she was still an addict throughout those years. Alcohol was the major one, but then when she came on to psychiatric meds, those became progressively worse. Some of which I think have caused a lot of the degenerative issues that give her the delusional behaviors and those. So there's some of those, and I've gone to counseling with psychologists over the years with her to try and talk it through and just see how we can manage the situation. But it's really difficult. It's not the same person. They're so influenced by those medications and addicted to them. Pain pills. She'll doctor shop, and she just always seems to be compromised.
When did you become aware of that? If she was a functioning addict back then, and it sounds like she was.
I always knew, because she would go through these depressive. I have that same kind of mentality. She would overwork herself when she was managing in a bakery. She would. I talked to him in a video one time about how they couldn't afford the baker anymore, so she would come in and bake at night, and then she would deliver things at 4:00 in the morning, and she would sleep on the bench for a couple of hours, and then open the store. And she just overly commits herself at the complete sacrifice of her health, to the point where she just dies out after a while. She just goes completely blank, and then she's at home in bed for 3 months and can't open the door. And if somebody opens the door, then she gets anxiety. That kind of situation. The front door, you've heard of people having those. They get scared. They can't leave the house. And she would stay in her bed all day long and only come out at night to eat. And this would go on for months at a time. And then she would emerge, and then she would invest herself into another project. And sure enough, within another, depending on how long it was, within a couple 3 years, we'd have a recurrence of the same kind of behavior. So it's been a lifelong thing. But I got a lot of her work ethic is part of the problem, and a lot of those obsessive behaviors. And I mentioned in my Stress for Success rant that I've become, I experienced a lot of negative effects from investing myself too much into my work, and had to continue to manage. I had a friend recently ask me, how do you manage your stress? And I said, with proper nutrition, proper sleep, and proper exercise. That's the only way to do it. If you can bench 200 pounds and somebody puts 300 on the bar, that's stressful. But if you can bench 400 pounds and somebody puts 300 on the bar, it's not stressful. It's the same 300 pounds, but it's two different individuals. One's prepared for the task, one isn't. You cannot get through life and be successful without engaging stress. It's going to happen in any business. If you want to be successful, you need to actually be able to handle more stress.
Yeah.
You have to chase those stressful situations. But how prepared are you? That's the big thing. And my preparation, some people may throw in yoga and meditation and stuff like that. I've really my meditation is just going to the gym and blasting out workouts. I think Joe Rogan said on his site he doesn't know anybody who trains hard that has that's depressed or has those issues. And I've found over the years that people that I who have suffer from depression, who have poured themselves into intense physical activity, have been able to emerge from that with good nutrition and sleep.
Right.
Yeah, they've done studies that compared exercise to SSRI drugs for mild to moderate depression and find that it performs as well in the short term and better in the long term.
100%.
So,
Now, are you only child? You have siblings?
I have a brother and sister. Yeah.
Oh, okay. What's the age difference?
Sister's a year older, brother's 2 years older.
Okay.
oh, you're the baby.
And then what's your relationship like with them?
Good. My brother lives in Iowa. My sister's near Chicago now. Boy, terrible. I don't even know where she lives. They bounced around a little bit from New York. They were in upstate New York, and then they've since moved. But it was always excellent. They understand the challenges as well, and but I'm right here trying to do the best I can to.
It sounds like you're carrying a lot of the load here. If you got both parents are nearby you, you've kind of supported them. Like,
yeah, it doesn't feel heavy to me, to be honest with you.
Well, that's because you lift fucking 900-pound squats.
I just spent
almost anything feels light compared to that.
Yeah, I just spent the last 10 minutes talking about this, this horrible situation with my mom, but it doesn't, for some reason, doesn't feel heavy for me. I look at it, who was it? Wayne Dyer was the motivational speaker that said once, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Mm. And it is what it is. I guess when you set expectations that can't be met, then you're disappointed. Undersell, overprovide kind of thing. I don't have the expectation that I'm going to be able to fix my mom. My expectation is that I can manage this, and I've provided her a home, pay her bills, send people over to clean the house.
No, I get that sense when you talk about it.
Yeah, I look at more as this is what I'm able to do. I've talked about, I think in Iran, I talked about the fact that at some point even when I'm writing things down that for my to-do list, I write things down that are stressing me out, and just recognizing what it is and whether or not I can do anything about it. Because sometimes I worry about shit I'm not in control of. And I just have to look at it and be like, I'm not in control of that. That's not on me. And I just cross it off my list. I might write it down again in a couple of days because I realize it's in my head and it's stressing me out. I offload that shit at night before bed. I have a notepad and pen next to my bed, or I'm on my phone just dropping in things that I know I have to get done, that I wouldn't be able to sleep, thinking I would forget, and I'd wake up in the morning and I have to respond to so-and-so and respond, I have to type that down and I can set it down and then it's offloaded. My brain's clear. And a lot of the stuff I offload isn't anything I can do anything about. Mm. A lot of times it's stuff that I just realize that I'm stressed about and I don't have any control over it. So I have to define it as such.
Excellent. Do you have a spiritual practice or faith practice or anything like that?
I don't. Be honest with you, I don't.
Good. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, man. Great time talking with you.
Yeah.
You seem like a very purpose-driven person,
very
and very obviously very successful. But talking to you, I know why.
Yep.
I know why you're very successful. So
thank you for the opportunity. I know I blather on. I've probably never done a short interview, but that's
neither
we don't either. It's all good. We normally go for hours, man.
Yeah.
We have that. You know what though? I love to get into this different parts. I mean, it was good to listen to you talk about bodybuilding and diet and stuff. But these are all things I've heard you talk about a million times.
Yeah.
I really like to know the things that make the man behind that tick and what's turned you into. And I could tell just by. I mean, you even got a little emotional talking about your dad. I can tell that there's definitely something there for sure that has probably driven and motivated you for a very long time.
I go into his room and he'll show me some Dr. Oz episode about something, and or he'll turn on Jeopardy, and he still answers the questions. I got to get up and leave. I feel bad about myself. I can't answer any of those questions. My pops is in there, 89 years old. He's like, boom, 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 one after the other, answering questions. Yeah.
That's cool.
So I talk till I'm hungry, and then I reach down in my bag, and I have 3 thermos in there to get me through the rest of the day. So we'll close off with the tip of the day.
I'll do it.
And the tip of the day is the thermos. I'm so proud of this thermos that I heat my meals up before I left the house this morning. I heated up 4 really hot Monster Mash, and I put them in these thermos, and they'll stay hot for 10, 12 hours. And so now every 3 hours all day long is whether I'm coming here or I go to Canada, or when I went to the UK, I took 6 meals. It was a 16-hour day. And I had meals every 3 hours the whole way there. And so I have all my athletes now to prepare for their day or an event. When Brian Shaw came to the Olympia, we sent him a big bucket of meals, and he stayed at a place with a kitchen, and he filled up his thermos every day full of hot meals. So when he was at the expo during the day, every 3 hours he could eat. He never wanted for food. And that's one of the hugest things in terms, like I said, meal prepping, meal planning. The number one predictor of success is your ability to control your nutrition, and not just in terms of calories, but now I also know that my stomach's going to feel good because I'm not at Smash Burger at the airport.
Right. ABC, Stan. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it, brother. Thank you very much, man.
Pleasure, man.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to Mind Pump. If your goal is to build and shape your body, dramatically improve your health and energy, and maximize your overall performance, check out our discounted RGB Super Bundle at mindpumpmedia.com. The RGB Super Bundle includes MAPS Anabolic, MAPS Performance, and MAPS Aesthetic. 9 months of phased expert exercise programming designed by Sal, Adam, and Justin to systematically transform the way your body looks, feels, and performs. With detailed workout blueprints and over 200 videos, the RGB Super Bundle is like having Sal, Adam, and Justin as your own personal trainers, but at a fraction of the price. The RGB Super Bundle has a full 30-day money-back guarantee, and you can get it now plus other valuable free resources at mindpumpmedia.com. If you enjoy this show, please share the love by leaving us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, and by introducing Mind Pump to your friends and family. We thank you for your support, and until next time, this is Mind Pump.